Hey, I'm Kay. Welcome to Kay's Chit-Chat, where your quiet thoughts become stories and your stories might help someone else feel less alone. The ghost in the phone. The meeting room on the 14th floor was full of light from the big glass windows. Michael Cole sat in the third seat on the left, legs crossed, one hand on the fancy wooden table, the other holding a blue pen. He was listening to his coworker David talk about the new mall project in Naperville. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Michael didn't look. He'd learned to ignore those little buzzes. Messages from Emma's school parents group, gym app notifications he hadn't opened in a month, junk he couldn't filter out. The phone buzzed again, then a third time. Michael's thumb squeezed the pen tighter. The tip made a little ink dot on the table. He watched it spread on his notepad, dark brown like a dried drop of blood. David was still talking about the air vents. Buzz, fourth time. Michael put the pen down. He leaned a little, still looking at the screen at the front, and reached into his pocket. His fingers touched the cold glass. He pulled the phone out, held it under the table, screen facing down. 4 unread messages, from a number he didn't know. He unlocked it with his fingerprint. His thumb was a little sweaty, and the sensor didn't read it the first time. Second try, the screen lit up. A screenshot. It was from a video call. On the left was a woman with long brown hair, her face blurred out with a black digital mark. She was still wearing a shirt, a black lace one, sitting back in a chair, holding her phone like she was watching a show. That difference, her still dressed, made Michael want to throw up right there at the meeting table. On the right was a man, face completely clear, no clothes at all. That man sat on the edge of a bed, leaning forward a little, legs spread, feet on the floor. His skin was pale under the blue light from a computer screen. You could see his ribs through his skin. His belly hung a little. The body of a 42-year-old man, not young anymore, but not old yet. One hand held the phone, the other hand was wrapped around his hard penis. Fingers squeezed tight so you could see every knuckle, thumb resting on the tip. Other fingers wrapped around. Even in a still photo, you could imagine exactly what the hand was doing. His face. It was his own face. His whole naked body. Looking into the phone camera with an expression Michael couldn't remember ever making. Mouth slightly open, lips dry, dark circles under his eyes, but those eyes had this strange light in them. Hungry and scared at the same time. Wanting to be seen but also wanting to disappear. In that still photo, you could almost hear the breathing. Fast, uneven, like someone drowning. Michael looked at his own hand in the photo. The way his fingers wrapped around himself with such familiarity, like that was the only friend left in the room at midnight. In the bedroom with Sarah, everything was always in darkness or under that soft yellow nightlight, hidden by sheets in the comfort of 20 years together. But in this picture, under that cold blue light, it was just a piece of meat, pink and hard and alone. And his hand was touching it like that was the only way he could touch something real. Michael felt his throat close up. A tiny choking sound came out, like air getting blocked. He put the phone face down on his leg, screen against his pants, like covering the picture meant erasing it from reality. He read what was under the photo, the words that showed up when he opened the message. "Hey there, you want to keep this to yourself, right?" Michael's ears went funny. Not the regular kind of funny when you stand up too fast. This was a high white noise, like a faraway bell in a room with no windows. He could hear David talking, but the words didn't mean anything anymore. They were just sounds, like the coffee machine in the hallway or a fire truck outside. He saw David's lips moving, saw him raise his eyebrows, but no actual words got through. His thumb moved on its own, opening the second message. Another screenshot, closer this time, from the waist down. His thighs spread wide, feet on the floor, everything pulled up tight against his body, skin wrinkled in the blue light, and his hand doing that thing with a rhythm that, even in a still photo, Michael could picture completely. Squeeze and loosen. Squeeze and loosen. Thumb rubbing the tip every time the hand went up. The skin on the back of his hand was stretched tight, blue veins standing out. Video call at 11:47 p.m. March 12th, 14 minutes long, HD quality, sound included. Call me. If you don't, the video goes to your wife before 5 p.m. A phone number followed. Michael, you look pale." David's voice cut through the funny noise in Michael's ears. He looked up. Everyone at the meeting was staring at him. David sat across the table, hands on the desk, head tilted, black glasses slipping down his nose. Mrs. Henderson from legal was looking at him with squinty eyes, watching. The intern at the end stopped typing. Michael's throat was dry. He tried to swallow, but his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He could feel his white shirt getting sweaty under the arms and on his back. The air conditioning suddenly felt too cold, cutting through the fabric right into his skin, making him shiver. And under his pants, between his legs, he felt something strange and empty, like because of that photo. That part didn't belong to him anymore. It had become evidence. Something cut off from his body, now existing somewhere out on the internet, in some stranger's hands. Dizzy, he said. His voice sounded weird, hoarse, low, like there was sand in his throat. I'm a little dizzy, probably didn't have enough coffee this morning. He smiled. The smile lasted 1 second and didn't reach his eyes. The corners of his mouth went up, but his lips got thin because all the blood went to his stomach. Want me to get you water? David asked. No, thanks. Michael put the phone face down on the table, screen down. He reached for his water glass, but his fingers were shaking so much that when he lifted it, water spilled over the side, running down the glass and soaking into his white papers. He put the glass down, grabbed a napkin to wipe the spill. Every move felt heavy, like moving underwater. His fingers worked automatically. Fold napkin, dab water, fold again, dab more, while in his head the words 11:47 p.m. March 12th played over and over like a song stuck on repeat. March 12th, 3 weeks ago. He remembered. Sarah had gone to a teacher's conference in Springfield. Emma was sleeping over at a friend's house. Michael was home alone, sitting in his office, computer screen glowing blue, phone in hand, with an app he'd downloaded and deleted and downloaded again on a night he couldn't sleep. He remembered how he opened that app at 11:30. He remembered swiping right on a woman named Amanda. Her profile picture, a blurry portrait, long brown hair, a mysterious smile. He remembered her first message. It's late, can't sleep? And he answered, no, I can't sleep. That was the first true thing he told her. And then came other truths. Things he'd never told Sarah. Things he'd never told anyone. He remembered her suggesting they switch to video. He remembered hesitating, then agreeing. He remembered taking off his shirt, then his pants, then sitting on the edge of the bed in his own bedroom, in the house he and Sarah had been paying off together for 12 years. He remembered holding the phone in one hand, the other hand holding himself, and doing that in front of the camera, eyes on the woman whose face was hidden in shadow, masturbating right on his wife's bed while she watched him through the screen. And he finished after about 10 minutes, all over his stomach and chest. And then he was breathing hard, eyes blurry, and the woman said, "Thank you, you're so sweet," and hung up. He remembered crying afterward. In the shower, water pounding down on him. He sat on the floor, hot water turning his skin red, everything washing down the drain. And he asked himself who he was, why he did it, but couldn't find an answer. And now, 3 weeks later, the answer had found him. Mrs. Henderson was saying something about the building permit deadline. Michael nodded. He felt his head nodding up and down, but couldn't control how fast. Too fast, too many times. You okay? David asked again, quieter, just for the two of them. Fine, Michael said. He picked up his pen, but his fingers wouldn't hold it. The pen fell on the floor, rolled under the table. He bent down to get it. For 3 seconds, face to the gray carpet, Michael closed his eyes. He smelled dust and cleaner. His breath hit his own legs through his pants, hot and wet. He thought, this is the last moment of my old life. When he sat up, his face was bright red. Not from embarrassment in front of his coworkers, just from blood rushing to his head when he bent over too long. He put the pen on the table. This time it stayed. David, he said, cutting off whatever David was saying. Sorry, I need to step out for 5 minutes. Feeling a little lightheaded. David nodded, eyes still on Michael with real concern. Go ahead, I'll send you the notes later. Michael pushed his chair back. The legs scraped against the carpet, making a ripping sound. He stood up, felt his knees buckle a little. His body, 6 feet 1 inch, 183 pounds, suddenly felt too heavy for his legs, which just wanted to run. He walked to the door. 7 steps, he counted. Each step, his hard leather shoes hit the floor, the sound in his ears like a hammer hitting a nail. Out of the meeting room, he turned right, walked down the long hallway to the bathroom. He pushed the door open, shoulder against the heavy door. The bathroom was empty. Fluorescent lights, white and blue, reflecting off white tiles, making everything look like an operating room. Michael went straight to the sink, grabbed the edge with both hands, bent over, face toward the drain. He breathed. Fast, shallow breaths, not deep enough to help the dizziness. He saw his face in the mirror, pale, lips dark, pupils big, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. He turned on the water, splashed cold water on his face. Water ran into the corners of his mouth, salty, not ocean salty, but the taste of sweat and tears that hadn't fallen yet. He did it again, then again, letting water run from his forehead to his chin, dripping onto his shirt collar, soaking the fabric in dark spots. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Michael dried his face with paper towels, hands shaking so much the paper crumpled before it touched his skin. He pulled out his phone. I don't have all day. 4:30. Miss it, and it's sent. He stared at the screen, white letters on blue background, sharp, cold. He imagined the hands typing those words, maybe big hands with knobby knuckles or small, thin hands with chewed fingernails. He didn't know who that person was, where they were, what they wanted besides money. But he knew one thing. That person had seen him in the worst possible light, at a moment when he wasn't himself. Or maybe that was his real self. His thumb moved across the screen, opened the keypad. He typed the number from the message, pressed the green call button. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. A voice answered, male voice, young but trying to sound lower, like they were forcing their voice to sound older. Mr. Cole. Not a question, a statement. Michael opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His throat was squeezed by an invisible hand. He looked in the mirror, saw his face trying to form an answer, but his lips just flapped like a fish on dry land. You hear me? The man's voice was calm, almost polite. I know you're at work. I know you just left the meeting. I know you're standing in the bathroom, holding the phone in your right hand, left hand on the sink. Michael pulled his left hand off the sink like it was burning. He looked around the bathroom. Both stalls were open, empty. High ceiling, just lights and air vents. No cameras. No one. Don't look, the man said like he was reading Michael's thoughts. I'm not there. I just have ways of knowing, that's all. Michael forced himself to speak. His voice cracked like wood breaking under weight. What do you want? What do I want? The man repeated, sounding almost amused. Good question. I want a lot of things. But first, I want you to listen. Michael heard a sip. Coffee, probably. The normalness of that sound in this situation made Michael want to throw up. You have a nice life, the man said. House in Hinsdale. Wife's a teacher. Daughter goes to private school. You're the lead architect at one of the biggest firms in Chicago. Your yearly income, I'd guess, around $400,000, maybe more. Michael didn't answer. And you have a dating app on your phone. The one you thought you deleted but never really did. You have an account under Mike Chiarch. And in the last 3 months, you've talked to at least 12 different women. 4 of them agreed to video calls. And one of them, Amanda, recorded the whole thing. HD quality, sound included. Michael slid down the wall, back against the cold tiles. He sat on the floor, legs out straight, holding the phone like a bomb about to explode. How much? Michael asked. His voice didn't sound like a lead architect anymore. Didn't sound like a husband or a father. It sounded like an animal backed into a corner, teeth showing but too weak to bite. The man on the other end was quiet for a moment. Michael heard steady breathing, calm, like the guy was meditating. 20,000, the man said. Wire transfer. I'll send the info. You have 4 hours. I can't, 20,000 in 4 hours. Like, you can take it from savings, your personal account, credit cards if you have to. You're smart, Cole. You're an architect. You solve problems every day. Michael closed his eyes. The cold from the tiles went through his shirt, through his skin, into his bones. He thought about Sarah. The way she laughed at comedies. The way she put her hand on his forehead when he had a fever. The way she said, you can do it, whenever he doubted himself. He thought about Emma. The way she ran to hug him when he got home. The way she showed off her good grades. The way she slept with one arm out of the blanket. Long, thin fingers like her mom's. He thought about the photo. His hand wrapped around himself under blue light. The way he'd exposed himself to a woman he'd never met, like that exposure could fill some empty space. He didn't have the courage to admit even to himself. You still there? The man asked. Yeah. Good. So do we have a deal? Michael opened his eyes. He looked at the mirror from his spot on the floor. Just the ceiling and part of his face, one eye, one lip, like a cut-off photo. Yeah, he said. We have a deal. Good, I'll send the info. Remember, 4:30 or things get different. The line went dead. Michael sat there, phone to his ear, even though the other end was empty. He heard the beep, beep, beep. Steady, emotionless, like a machine's heartbeat. He lowered the phone, looked at the screen. A new message, a bank account number, a name, the payment marked Architect Consultation. His fingers shook as he opened the banking app. He typed the password, got it wrong the first time, fingers hitting random keys. Second time, right. He looked at his personal account balance, $12,000. He transferred another $15 from savings, just to be safe. While the transaction processed, he sat on the bathroom floor, legs out straight, back against the wall, eyes on the ceiling. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, a frequency you couldn't see, but Michael felt like a headache just starting. He looked at his watch, 1:20 p.m., 3 hours and 10 minutes. His phone screen lit up, transaction confirmed. Michael took a screenshot, sent it to that number with a message. Sent. Within 10 seconds, the answer came, "Good, smart move, Cole." "We'll talk again." Michael stared at, "We'll talk again. Not done, not you're safe. Talk again." He started shaking. Not like before. The small shakes. This was deep shaking. From his spine, from his bones, making his whole body vibrate like a building in an earthquake. His arms wrapped around his shoulders, fingernails digging into his skin through his shirt, but he didn't feel it. He sat on the bathroom floor on the 14th floor of an office building outside Chicago, in a suit worth $1,200, and he had never felt so completely naked. Footsteps in the hallway. Someone coming toward the bathroom. Michael tried to stand up, but his legs were like jelly. His knees wouldn't straighten. He had to grab the sink and pull himself up, his body heavy as if weighed down. The door opened. David walked in, saw Michael drying his face with paper towels, eyes red. "Hey," David said, worried. "You okay? Everyone's waiting." Michael crumpled the paper towel into a ball, threw it in the trash. He looked at himself in the mirror one last time, a tall man in a nice suit, but the light in his eyes was gone. And under his pants, he still felt that strange emptiness, like his body had been photographed, copied, and now existed somewhere beyond his reach. "Fine," Michael said. He fixed his tie, smoothed his hair, took a deep breath. "I'm fine." He walked out of the bathroom, leaving behind the smell of cleaner and the drops of water still on the sink. In his pocket, the phone was silent. But Michael knew that silence was only temporary. And when it ended, his life, as he knew it, would end too, for sure, 30 p.m. That deadline hung in front of him like a knife. And Michael walked back into the meeting room, sat down, picked up his blue pen, and waited. Not for the meeting to end, for the knife to fall. The perfect husband. The party room at the Drake Hotel in Oak Brook was full of golden light from crystal chandeliers. Michael stood next to Sarah, at the bar, whiskey in his right hand, left hand resting on his wife's back. Through the silk of her black dress, he could feel each bump of her spine as she leaned forward to listen to someone talk. Sarah looked beautiful tonight. She always looked beautiful at company parties. She knew how to pick clothes, how to smile, how to make everyone comfortable. Michael watched the way she tilted her head, listening to the CFO's wife talk about her European vacation. The way she nodded at just the right moments. The way she touched the other woman's arm like a sign of understanding. He'd seen her do it 100 times. But tonight, every move she made him want to throw up. Michael's whiskey was half gone. He didn't remember drinking that fast. The alcohol burned going down, but not enough to numb the dread settling deep in his bones. He put the glass on the bar, his finger accidentally dragging the little paper napkin underneath, crumpling it. "Michael, there you are." Tom Reynolds, the CEO, called out from behind. Michael turned, his hand leaving Sarah's back, and in that moment of empty air, he felt cold. Tom walked over, shaking Michael's hand hard, other hand slapping his shoulder like they were old friends. "Tom," Michael said. His voice automatically dropped into the low, steady range, like an instrument tuned just right. "Thanks for putting this together. Great party." "Oh, thank you." Tom turned to Sarah, eyes bright. "Sarah, you look amazing. Michael didn't tell me you were coming. I wouldn't have believed him." Sarah smiled the smile Michael knew by heart. Lips open just right, top teeth touching bottom lip, eyes crinkling. "You're too nice, Tom. I just threw something on." "Threw something on? The women of Chicago should take notes." Tom slapped Michael's shoulder again, harder this time, making him dip a little. "And Michael, I have to say, you two standing together, it reminds me of when my wife and I were young. You guys are the golden couple of this company, you know that? Golden couple." Those 4 words hit Michael's ears like drops of hot metal. He smiled. The smile came automatically, his face muscles moving the way they'd learned from thousands of business meetings. He knew what that smile looked like. Coworkers had told him it made him look sincere and friendly. But tonight, as his face lifted, he felt every muscle under his skin stretching too far. Pain. A dull ache from his cheekbones up to his temples. "Tom's exaggerating," Michael said. His voice was still steady, still even, still the voice of a man with nothing to hide. "I'm just lucky to work for him." "Lucky?" Tom laughed, turning to the people nearby. "Listen to this. Michael Cole says he's lucky. The guy with the beautiful wife, great kid, house in Hinsdale, just nominated for Chicago's Young Architect of the Year. He says he's lucky." Everyone laughed. Michael laughed too. He felt his laugh mixing with everyone else's. But in his ears, it sounded like breaking glass. Tiny sharp pieces falling where no one could see. Michael's left hand, hanging at his side, slowly clenched into a fist. His fingers squeezed tight, fingernails pressing into his palm. First just pressure, then a sharp pain in the middle where his thumbnail cut through. He squeezed harder. The pain spread, clear and real, different from the fuzzy panic spinning in his head. Michael kept the smile on his face, eyes still on Tom with grateful looks, while his nail pushed deeper. He felt the skin under his thumb start to tear, a warm, wet liquid seeping out between his fingers. Blood. He didn't look, but he knew. The faint smell of metal rose from his closed fist. "And tonight," Tom continued, pointing to the little stage at the end of the room, "I want to thank Michael. The Naperville Mall project. You all know, thanks to Michael, we're 3 weeks ahead. 3 weeks, while our competitors are still stuck on permits." Everyone clapped. Michael nodded a little, a humble gesture he'd done so many times it was automatic. But when he bowed his head, he saw his palm bleeding, dark red drops squeezing between his fingers, starting to fall on the cream-colored carpet. He quickly put his hand in his pocket, hiding it. "Michael is the luckiest man in the world," Tom said, voice excited, pointing at Sarah standing next to him. "Look at her. Beautiful, smart, and a teacher, raising kids. Michael, I'm telling you, if I were you, I'd never take my eyes off her." More laughter. Michael laughed too, but in his head, the words, "never take my eyes off her," echoed together with another image. Blue light from a computer screen, a woman with her face blurred out, and his hand between his legs. His nail pushed deeper into his bleeding palm. This time the pain wasn't sharp anymore. It had become a steady pulse, like a second heart beating inside his fist. Sarah moved beside him. She put her hand on his arm, her thumb rubbing the fabric of his jacket. That touch, light, familiar, full of affection, made Michael's whole body go stiff. He felt each of her fingers through the fabric, like little burns in a row. "I'm getting a drink," Sarah said, quite enough for just him to hear. "You want another?" Michael shook his head. "Let me get it for you." "No, I got it. You stay and talk to Tom." She left, her black dress moving through the golden light, leaving behind an empty space that Michael felt like cold wind blowing right into his ribs. He watched her go, but his eyes weren't really seeing her. They were just pointing that way, automatic, keeping up the look of a husband admiring his wife. Tom said something else about the project, about expanding into Indianapolis. Michael nodded, adding a short, exact sentence here and there. He was still working, still talking, still smiling, but his hand in his pocket was soaking wet. He could feel the blood running along the lines on his palm, down to his wrist, soaking into the pocket lining. Every time he moved his hand, the cut on his palm opened a little more, and the pain shot through him again, reminding him he could still feel something real. About 15 minutes later, Michael wasn't sure, he'd lost track of time, Sarah came back holding a glass of red wine. She stood next to him, shoulder to shoulder, and Michael felt the warmth of her arm through his jacket. His body reacted by going rigid like an animal backed into a corner. "Tom," Sarah said, still sweet, "thank you for such a wonderful party. Michael is always telling me how great you are." "Oh, she's just saying that. Michael never compliments anyone," Tom laughed, then turned to another guest, leaving Michael and Sarah standing together at the bar. Sarah took a sip of wine. Michael reached with his right hand, the clean one, to adjust his tie. He felt sweat on his neck under his white shirt. The room was air-conditioned, but his body was burning, every pore opening to release some nameless heat. "You okay?" Sarah whispered, just for him. Michael turned to look at her. Sarah wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were still on the stage where Tom was starting another story. But her body leaned a little toward him, just a bit, enough for Michael to feel her attention like a weight on his shoulders. "Fine," he said. "Why do you ask?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She put her wine glass down, her finger tracing the rim in a silent circle. Then she said, still whispering, still light, but with something sharp underneath that made Michael's spine tingle. "You're not really smiling. 3 words, simple. exact, like a surgeon's knife placed right where it needed to cut. Michael felt his chest squeeze tight. His lungs were crushed, air couldn't get in or out. He looked into Sarah's eyes. The first time tonight, he'd really looked and saw something there that made him want to run. Not suspicion, not questioning, just watching. The patience of someone who'd spent 20 years reading the smallest lines in his soul. "What are you talking about?" Michael smiled. This time he tried to make it real, pulling his face muscles up, showing teeth, squinting his eyes a little. But he knew when you try to make something real, it just ends up even more fake than before. Sarah didn't look at his smile. She looked at his eyes. And in 3 seconds of silence, Michael felt her reading something in there. Something he didn't know he'd written. "You want to go home early?" Sarah asked. Her voice softened, but not the soft of worry. The soft of someone asking a question she already knew the answer to. "You seem tired." Michael wanted to say yes. Wanted to say, "Take me home. Get me out of here. Let me take off this suit, take a hot shower, and lie down and not pretend for one more second." But he shook his head. No, let's stay. You look beautiful tonight. Everyone's happy you're here." That sentence, beautiful, natural, exactly what a husband should say, came out of his mouth like words written ahead of time. He even reached to touch Sarah's hair, a familiar move he did in family photos. Sarah didn't pull away. She let him do it, standing still, eyes still on him with an expression Michael couldn't read. And when his hand left her hair, she said, "Okay, we'll stay." She picked up her wine, took another sip, and turned to talk to the marketing director's wife, who had just walked over. Her voice was happy again, relaxed, like the last 3 seconds had never happened. Michael stood next to her, left hand still hidden in his pocket, blood on his palm starting to dry, making a thin, tight skin that felt like tearing wet paper every time he moved his fingers. He looked around the room. Familiar faces, co-workers, partners, bosses, all laughing, talking, drinking, enjoying a perfect evening. And in the center of it all, Michael and Sarah stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder, hands on each other's backs, smiling at the right times, saying the right things, making the perfect picture of a couple with nothing to hide. "Golden couple," Tom had said. Michael looked at the whiskey glass in front of him, saw the golden light reflecting off the amber liquid. He picked it up, drank the rest in one gulp, letting the alcohol go down his throat like anesthetic that wasn't strong enough. When he put the glass down, he happened to look at his right hand, the clean one, and saw it shaking. A small shake, only he could notice, but enough for someone as sharp as Sarah to see. He quickly put that hand in his right pocket, the clean one, and stood there, both hands hidden, eyes on the stage where Tom was telling some joke, and he laughed. And in his head, a voice, not someone else's, just his own echo, repeated, "You're not really smiling. You're not really smiling. You're not really smiling." Sarah stood next to him, not looking, but Michael knew she felt every breath he took, every stiffness in his body. She didn't say anything more. She just stood there, beside him, like she'd stood for 20 years. And her silence tonight was scarier than any question. The party went on. Laughter rang out, glasses were raised, stories were told. And Michael stood in the middle of it all, both hands hidden, one wet with blood, one shaking, and he wondered, how long until she knows? How long until they all know? He didn't have an answer. He only knew that when Sarah looked at him again, in 5 minutes, in an hour, when they got home and the bedroom door closed, that look wouldn't be patient watching anymore. It would be the truth. And Michael didn't know if he could stand up when that happened. 10,000. Michael sat in his home office on the second floor, computer screen glowing pale blue, design drawings spread across his desk. More than 10 days had passed since the call in the office bathroom. 10 days of living like a walking dead person. Go to work, meetings, come home, dinner, talk to Emma, sleep next to Sarah. 10 days of regular messages, new demands, and fear sitting in his belly like a tumor. 20,000 first, then 15, then 25. Michael's personal account was empty. He'd taken from savings until he couldn't take more without raising questions. And now the new message asked for what he was most afraid of. At 10,000, transfer from the joint account. I know you have access. 3 p.m. today. His phone lay face down on the desk, screen dark, but Michael still saw those words burned into his head. He sat still, hands on his legs, feeling each heartbeat hit his ribs like a door being pounded over and over. He looked at his laptop, the banking app already open. The joint account, his and Sarah's, for Emma's school fees, house repairs, emergency money. Current balance, $47,342. Michael put his hands on the keyboard. His fingers were cold, even though the room was heated. He looked at the screen at the words, Checking account, Cole, Michael, and Sarah, and felt like he was looking at something that didn't belong to him. He couldn't, he thought. That's Emma's money, family money. His phone buzzed. Michael didn't want to look, but his hand flipped it over anyway. New message. Down to 3 p.m. You don't want me to send the video to your wife, do you? Or do you want your daughter to see her dad on the internet? Sweat ran down his spine. Michael felt each drop like ants crawling from his neck to his waist, soaking into his shirt. He opened the banking app, hand shaking so much he had to put his wrist on the desk to steady it. He typed the amount, 10,000. His finger hovered over enter. He stared at that number, 10,000, and it looked bigger than any number he'd ever spent. More than fixing the AC when it broke 2 years ago. More than plane tickets for last winter's vacation. More than the watch he'd wanted for years but never bought. His finger pressed down. The screen showed, transaction complete, new balance, 37,342. Michael stared at those words, and in his head a voice, his own voice, but far away like from the bottom of a well, whispered, "What did you just do?" He closed the banking app, closed the browser, closed everything. The computer screen went back to the wallpaper. The family photo at Lake Michigan last summer, Emma, in the middle, hair blowing in the wind, Sarah's arm around him, all three of them smiling. A perfect picture. Michael looked at his own face in the photo. The man who didn't know that, 11 months later, he'd sit in this same room, taking family money to pay a blackmailer. He looked at the eyes of that man in the photo. Still bright, still believing everything was okay. Michael looked away. His phone buzzed again. Confirmation from the man. Got it, good. I'll be in touch next week. Next week. Not done, not over. Next week. Michael put the phone on the desk, but his fingers stuck to the glass, not wanting to let go. He stared at the phone like a coiled snake, knowing it would bite, but unable to walk away because it was already part of him. A noise downstairs. Sarah was home early. Michael stood up so fast his chair tipped back, hitting the bookshelf. He reached to catch it, but his eyes stayed on the computer screen, the family photo, the closed banking app, no evidence left. He checked quickly. Browser closed, history deleted, no trace. Sarah's feet on the stairs. Michael felt each step like heartbeats in his chest. Step, pause, step, pause. She reached the hallway. Michael sat down, grabbed a drawing, pretended to study it, but he was holding it upside down. He noticed when he saw the notes facing the wrong way. He turned it around quickly, but the door was already open. Sarah stood in the doorway holding her bag of student homework. She wore her usual gray sweater, hair tied up, a red ink stain on her pointer finger. Signs of a long day grading papers. You haven't come down for dinner? She asked. Yeah, I was reviewing drawings for the new project. Michael held up the paper, but didn't look at it. He looked at Sarah, and for a split second, he wondered if she could see everything through his eyes. Could she see the hand that just transferred $10,000 out of their account? Emma's making spaghetti, Sarah said. She wanted to surprise you. Oh, great, Michael smiled. That smile, he'd been practicing it for 10 days, and it got easier every time, like a muscle getting stronger. I'll come down. Sarah nodded, but didn't leave. She stood at the door looking around the room, at the drawings, the dark computer screen, the phone face down on the desk. She didn't say anything, but, Michael saw her watching, taking in every detail without judging. I'll go down first, she said, and left. Michael breathed out. He didn't know how long he'd been holding his breath. His lungs burned when the air rushed in, each little air sac hurting as it expanded. He looked at his phone, still face down, still silent. But he knew in a few minutes, the bank notification would show up on the lock screen. And if Sarah saw it, Michael picked up his phone, opened the banking app. He found the notification settings and turned them all off. No text notifications, no email notifications, nothing on the lock screen. Done. He put the phone down and sat still for a moment. In his head, a question echoed. What are you doing? You're hiding from her. You're turning yourself into a liar. But he was already a liar. From that night in March, from before that, Michael stood up, walked downstairs. Each step was heavy, like his feet were sinking into the wood. Down in the kitchen, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air, warm and familiar. Emma stood at the stove, stirring the pot with a spoon, her hair tied to one side. She was taller than last summer, Michael noticed. Longer neck, wider shoulders, but still tilted her head the same way when concentrating, the way he'd seen since she was 3. Dad! Emma turned, eyes bright. You came right on time. The spaghetti's almost ready. I could smell it upstairs, Michael said, his voice automatically switching to a happy, excited tone. He walked into the kitchen, ruffled Emma's hair. My girl is such a good cook. Emma laughed, pushed his hand away without really meaning it. Dad, stop. Go sit down. I'll get the plates. Michael sat at the table, across from Sarah. She was looking at her phone. Michael felt his heart stop for a beat, but she was just checking her calendar, then put the phone down, screen up. Emma brought out the plates of spaghetti, sprinkled Parmesan cheese on top the way Michael always did. She put the plate in front of him, then sat next to her mom. Taste it, Dad, Emma said, waiting. Michael picked up his fork, twirled some spaghetti, put it in his mouth. Sweet and sour tomato, garlic, cheese. All the familiar tastes suddenly felt foreign on his tongue. He chewed, swallowed, and felt the food slide down his throat like something that shouldn't be inside him. It's really good, he said. Seriously, really good. Emma smiled bright. Sarah smiled too, but she looked at Michael a little longer, like she was waiting for something else besides the words. They ate in silence for a while. The sound of forks on plates, chewing, Emma talking about the math test she got an A on. Michael nodded, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments. He was still working, still being a dad, still being a husband, and in his head, the words, "I'll be in touch next week," flashed like a warning light. After dinner, Emma washed the dishes. Sarah made tea, put a cup in front of Michael. She sat across from him, both hands wrapped around her cup, steam rising to hide part of her face. I need to ask you something, Sarah said. Michael's whole body went rigid, his chest squeezed tight, heart beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. She knows. She checked the account. She knows. My mom called yesterday, Sarah said. She noticed a $15,000 transfer from our savings account. She asked if I knew about it. Michael wasn't breathing. He stared at his tea, the steam rising, and thought, mother-in-law. She was still on the savings account from when Michael and Sarah first got married. He'd forgotten. What did you tell her? Michael asked. His voice was hoarse, like there was dust in his throat. I said you were investing in a small project, Sarah said. I said it was a good opportunity, and you'd done your research. Michael looked up at her. Sarah was looking at him, not blinking. There was no suspicion in her eyes, at least no suspicion he could see. She was just looking at him, with the patience of someone who'd learned to wait for answers. Yeah, Michael said, an investment. I forgot to tell you, sorry. It's okay, Sarah said. I just needed to know so I could tell my mom. So it's fine. She took a sip of tea. Michael took a sip too, but couldn't taste anything. His tongue was like a piece of dry leather, and the hot tea just ran over it like water through a pipe. Did your mom ask anything else? Michael said. No, she just wanted to make sure we weren't having any problems. Sarah put her cup down, fingers tracing the rim. I told her there were no problems. No problems. Those 4 words cut across Michael's stomach like a blade. He looked at Sarah, the woman sitting across from him, in a gray sweater, hair tied up, red ink on her finger, and she looked beautiful in a way he didn't deserve to see. Thank you, Michael said. For what? For telling your mom that. For trusting me. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up, took both their cups to the sink. On the way, she stopped, put her hand on Michael's shoulder for a second. A light touch, like a bird landing then flying away. I always trust you, she said, and walked on. Michael sat at the table in the warm kitchen, still smelling spaghetti sauce, hearing Emma doing dishes in the background. He looked at the empty cup in front of him, at the dry tea stain at the bottom making a brown ring. His phone didn't buzz, no new messages, but Michael knew it was still there. The coiled snake, waiting for next week, for the next time, until he had nothing left to give. He heard Sarah and Emma talking in the kitchen, their voices blending together, calm like running water, and he wondered, when does this silence end? When does she find out? When does Emma find out? He didn't have an answer. He only knew that when he stood up, his legs were heavy as lead, and he had to hold the back of his chair to keep from falling. Michael went upstairs into the bedroom, closed the door. He stood in the middle of the room, looking at the bed where he and Sarah had slept for 12 years, at the closet where his suits hung neatly next to her dresses, at the photo on the nightstand, their wedding picture, 15 years ago, both of them young, believing marriage was a promise that would never be broken. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands on his legs, staring at those hands, the hands that just transferred $10,000 out of his family's account, the hands that had done those things on the video call, the hands now shaking like leaves in the wind. The bedroom door opened softly. Michael turned. Sarah stood in the doorway, still holding a dish towel. She looked at him, sitting on the edge of the bed, hands on his legs, not quite meeting her eyes. "Emma's asleep," Sarah said. "I came to check on you." "I'm fine," Michael said. "Just tired." Sarah nodded. She came in, put the towel on the dresser, stood in front of the closet reaching for her pajamas. Michael watched her from behind, her shoulders thin under the sweater, the way she unbuttoned her shirt slowly, not hurrying. And in that moment, Michael saw Sarah's phone on the nightstand. The screen just lit up with a notification from the banking app. He caught a few words before the screen went dark. "New transaction, $10,000 from account." Michael looked away. Sweat ran down his back, cold as ice. He felt every hair on his neck stand up. He didn't know if Sarah had seen that notification. She was turned away from the phone, still changing, like nothing in the world could distract her. But Michael saw, in the moment Sarah turned back, her eyes glanced at the phone, a quick, light look, like a needle touching skin. She didn't say anything. She picked up the phone, put it in the nightstand drawer, and turned to Michael with a smile, still gentle, still warm, like she'd seen nothing, like everything was still fine. "Time for bed," she said, and turned off the light. Michael lay down next to her in the dark. He felt Sarah's breath beside him, steady, calm. He lay still, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, and wondered. Did she see? Does she know? Or is she just waiting? Waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to break, waiting for the answer he can't give. He didn't have an answer. He only had Sarah's silence next to him, and in that silence, Michael felt something even scarier than accusations. Patience. And it was wearing him down, second by second, in the dark of the room where he once believed he was the perfect husband. The way Sarah looked at him. 3 weeks. 21 days since the first transfer. Michael had gotten used to his new routine, waking up before sunrise, checking his phone before opening his eyes, reading messages from the unknown number, answering with short sentences, deleting them, then getting out of bed with a face already prepared. But lately, that face had started to crack. For 3 nights in a row, Michael came home after 9. He told Sarah it was because the Naperville project was in a busy phase, but the truth was he'd been sitting in his car outside the office, hands on the steering wheel, staring at his phone and waiting for a message, waiting for a demand, waiting for the next knife to fall. Monday night, he got home at 9:15. Emma was already upstairs. Sarah sat in the living room, reading under the lamp. She didn't ask about the time. She just looked at him for a moment and said, "There's food in the microwave." Tuesday night, he got home at 9:30. Sarah was still there, still reading the same book, but the pages hadn't turned. She looked at him over her left shoulder, and Michael felt that look like a finger touching the back of his neck. Light, but it didn't go away. Wednesday night, he tried to come home early, 7:30. But when he walked in, he saw Sarah standing in the kitchen, holding a pot, frozen mid-motion. She looked at him, then at the clock on the wall, then back at him. She didn't say anything, but that look, Michael felt it like a rope around his neck, not tight enough to choke, but tight enough to know it was there. Thursday night, Michael got home at 8. He tried to act normal, took off his shoes, hung up his jacket, went into the kitchen. Sarah was sitting at the table. In front of her were 2 plates of cold food. Emma wasn't there. "Emma's studying upstairs," Sarah said, not looking at him. She was staring at her plate, like she was reading something written in tomato sauce. Michael sat across from her. He picked up his fork, but didn't lift it to his mouth. He watched Sarah, the way she sat straight, the way her hands rested on the table, the way she didn't touch her food. "You're not eating?" Michael asked. "I was waiting for you," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath that calm that Michael couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was a controlled emptiness, like a frozen lake. Everything still underneath, but the ice was thin. "I'm sorry," Michael said, "and I know I've been coming home late." Sarah didn't answer. She looked at him, looked into his eyes, and Michael felt that look like a hand on his chest, counting each heartbeat. "I haven't been asking you about it," Sarah said. That's not, about what? About you coming home late, about you being quiet, about you." She stopped, like she was choosing her words carefully. "About you snapping at Emma on Sunday." Michael felt a sharp pain in his chest. Sunday night, Emma had asked if he wanted to watch a movie with her, and he'd said no, in a voice so harsh she'd taken a step back, eyes wide, and quietly gone upstairs. "I didn't mean to," Michael said, "I was just tired." "You're tired," Sarah repeated. Not a question, a confirmation. She looked at him for a moment, then asked, "Do you want to tell me about it?" Michael looked up. The kitchen light hit Sarah's eyes, making little sparkles in her pupils, like pieces of broken glass. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to open his mouth and say everything about the app, about Amanda, about the sleepless nights, about the hands in the blue light, about the messages and the money and the fear eating him from the inside. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. His throat closed up like a hand squeezing from inside. He looked at Sarah, and in his head, 1,000 sentences spun around. But they all ended with the same image. Emma's face looking at him from a phone screen, her eyes wide and his hand between his legs. "I can't," he finally said. His voice was hoarse, like there was sand in his throat. "I can't talk about it right now." Sarah nodded, slowly, the nod of someone who already knew the answer before asking. "Okay," she said. "When you can, tell me." She stood up, took her plate, still full, untouched, and walked to the sink. Michael watched her back, watched her dump the food in the trash, watched her turn on the water and wash the plate. Each move steady, exact, no faster and no slower than any other day. And that normalness in this situation made Michael want to scream. Sarah dried her hands on a towel and turned around. She looked at Michael. He was still sitting at the table, his plate untouched, and asked a question Michael never thought he'd hear from her. "Is there someone else?" 4 words. No anger, no accusation. Just a question asked with the voice of someone asking about the weather or weekend plans. Michael felt his whole body freeze. Every muscle from head to toe clenched, like an electric current ran through him. His chest stopped moving up and down. It just stopped, like a building that had lost its support structure. He looked at Sarah. She stood at the edge of the table, still holding the towel, and she looked at him without blinking. There were no tears in her eyes, no collapse, just watching. The patience of someone who'd spent 40 years reading the smallest lines in text and was now reading him. 10 seconds. Michael knew it was 10 seconds because he counted. Each second that passed, the silence between them got thicker, like air before a storm. 1 second, he thought, say no. 2 seconds, he thought, say yes. 3 seconds, he thought, say the truth. 4 seconds, he thought, what is the truth? 5 seconds. He looked into Sarah's eyes and saw something fading, like a candle in a glass jar. And he knew that every second he stayed silent, that flame got smaller. 6 seconds. Michael opened his mouth. 7 seconds. No sound. 8 seconds. He saw Sarah breathe out, a long, soft breath, like she'd just gotten an answer she'd known for a long time. 9 seconds. Sarah nodded, a very small nod, just enough for Michael to notice. 10 seconds. She turned away. "Sarah," Michael said, his voice cracked like a piece of wood breaking in half. Sarah stopped. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her back to him. Michael looked at her shoulders, 2 small, thin shoulders shaking slightly, but only for a second. Then she pulled them straight, pulled them into the posture of a woman who decided not to fall apart. "I'm not going to cry," Sarah said, her voice still calm, but there was a tiny crack at the end, like a wall that had just developed a hairline fracture only the person closest could hear. "I'm not going to cry over something I don't even know yet." She walked out of the kitchen. Michael sat at the table. His hand was still holding his fork, but his fingers had gone stiff, and the fork started to slip slowly like an hourglass tipping. When it hit the plate, the sound echoed in the quiet kitchen like a gunshot. Michael stood up. He wanted to run after Sarah, wanted to say something, anything to keep her there, to stop this moment from ending. But his legs wouldn't move. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, hands hanging at his sides, and felt each heartbeat hit his ribs like punches from inside. He heard Sarah go upstairs. He heard the bedroom door close, not slammed, just close softly, like she still had enough control to be gentle. And then silence. Michael stood in the kitchen, under the white fluorescent light, looking at the 2 plates of cold food on the table, and felt his house, the house he'd been paying off for 12 years, suddenly feel like a stranger's place, a museum displaying the life of a man who no longer existed. He didn't know how long he stood there. 10 minutes? 20? Until he heard water running from the upstairs bathroom. And he knew Sarah was doing what she did every night, washing her face, brushing her teeth, getting ready for bed. That normalness tonight hurt more than any accusation. Michael dragged himself up the stairs. Each step felt like a hill, and when he reached the hallway, he saw the bedroom door was closed. He stood in front of it, hand on the doorknob, and felt the cold metal seep into his palm. He didn't open it. Instead, he went into his office, closed the door, and sat in front of his dark computer screen. In the darkness of the room, Michael looked out the window at the distant streetlights, at the black sky with no stars, and wondered, how do I go back? How do I become the man she thought I was? He didn't have an answer. He only had the phone in his pocket, And in the phone were the unread messages, the threats that hadn't ended, and the first photo, the photo that started everything. Around midnight, Michael heard the bedroom door open. Sarah's footsteps down the hall, down the stairs. He sat still, not moving, not breathing. He heard her go into the kitchen, open the fridge, close the fridge, then silence. And then another sound, keyboard keys. Michael slowly stood up, opened the office door, and looked down over the railing into the living room. Blue light from a laptop screen reflected on Sarah's face. She was sitting on the couch, computer on her lap, and Michael could see the screen, the bank's website. She was logging into their joint account. Michael stood at the top of the stairs, not breathing, not moving. He watched Sarah's fingers move across the keyboard, watched her type the username, the password, and wait. The screen loaded. Sarah stared at the screen, and Michael watched from far away, unable to see what she was seeing. But he knew the numbers she was seeing. The savings account balance cut almost in half. The transfers with no clear explanation, and $10,000 from the joint account 3 days ago marked investment. Sarah didn't move. She sat in front of the screen, blue light on her face, highlighting her features, high cheekbones, tight lips, and unblinking eyes staring at the numbers like they were a photo from another world. Michael saw her hands on the keyboard. Her fingers weren't shaking. She didn't close the browser, didn't call anyone, didn't cry. She just sat there, watching. And in that stillness, Michael felt something even scarier than anger. She was remembering. She was remembering every transfer, every late night, every avoided look, every second of silence in the kitchen tonight. She was connecting the dots, and Michael knew that every dot she connected, another piece of the picture appeared. And that picture wasn't of a husband tired from work. It was of a man hiding something. Sarah sat there a little longer. Michael didn't know how long, maybe 5 minutes, maybe half an hour. Then she closed the laptop, put it on the coffee table, and sat in the dark. Michael still stood at the top of the stairs, hand gripping the railing, knuckles white. He wanted to go down there, wanted to sit next to her, wanted to tell her she was right to suspect, but also wrong. It wasn't another woman, it was something worse, something he didn't know if she could forgive. But he didn't go down. He stood there, watching Sarah slowly stand up and walk up the stairs. When she reached the hallway, she looked toward the office, where Michael was standing just a few steps away. The dim light from the window hit her face, and Michael saw her eyes. Not sad, not angry, just distant, like she was looking at him through thick glass. "I know," she said. Her voice was a whisper, but in the silent hallway, it rang like a bell. "I don't know what it is yet, but I know something's wrong." Michael didn't answer. His throat was dry, his tongue like cotton. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she went into the bedroom and closed the door. This time, Michael heard the lock, a soft click, almost inaudible. But in the quiet night, it sounded like ice cracking. Michael stood in the hallway, hands still on the railing, and felt the closed door between him and Sarah. He didn't knock. He didn't call her name. He just stood there in the dark, listening to the silence from the other side. The silence of a woman who knew, but hadn't said. Who saw, but hadn't asked. Who waited, but wasn't waiting anymore. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Michael didn't need to look to know who it was. He stood still, letting the phone buzz in his pocket like a second heart beating in the dark. And he wondered, how much longer until Sarah knows everything? How much longer until she opens that door and asks the final question? He didn't have an answer. He only knew that when that door opened, he'd have nothing left to hide, and nothing left to hold on to. The final threat. The clock on the nightstand showed 2:16 a.m. when the phone buzzed. Michael wasn't sleeping. He'd been lying in the office for 3 hours, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound from the bedroom across the hall. Sarah hadn't come out. She hadn't opened the door. She hadn't called for him. Her silence was heavier than any screaming. The phone buzzed again. Michael picked it up, the screen glowing blue in the darkness. And I'm to end this game? 50,000, 24 hours, or the video goes to everyone? Michael read the message 3 times. 50,000. More than any previous demand. More than he could take out without the bank noticing. More than he could explain to Sarah, if she still wanted explanations. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His finger rested on the screen but didn't move. The phone buzzed a 3rd time, not a message this time, a video file. Michael stared at the screen, at the white play button on the black background. He knew what was inside. He'd seen the photos, knew what it was, but he'd never seen it moving, never heard the sound. His finger pressed the screen, the video opened. It was his bedroom. The view from Amanda's phone camera. She'd put it somewhere. Maybe on the bookshelf, maybe on the nightstand. The frame was slightly tilted, but clear enough. Michael watched himself walk into the frame. He was wearing a white shirt, gray pants, the clothes he'd worn that day, the day Sarah went to Springfield, the day Emma stayed at a friend's house. In the video, he sat on the edge of the bed facing the camera, and he saw his own eyes. Bright, but not with joy. Bright with the light of someone doing something he knew was wrong but couldn't stop. He watched himself unbutton his shirt. His fingers in the video didn't shake. They moved mechanically, quickly, like they'd been practiced. Undo shirt, fold it, put it aside. Then his hand went to his belt. Michael wanted to turn it off. His finger was on the screen, ready to press. But he didn't. He watched. In the video, he took off his pants, sat on the edge of the bed in his gray underwear, legs spread, and started doing what he'd done 1,000 times in his life, but never in front of a camera. In the video, his hand moved with a familiar rhythm, but his face didn't. His face in the video looked toward the camera, lips pressed together, nostrils flaring, and there was a moment, maybe half a second, where he looked straight into the lens with the expression of someone who just realized he was being watched. But he didn't stop. In the video, he didn't stop. Michael felt stomach acid rise in his throat. He threw his phone on the floor. It landed on the carpet with a soft thud, but the video kept playing. He could still hear his own breathing from the speaker. Fast, heavy breathing, like someone trying to escape themselves. He lunged forward, grabbing the chair, and threw up. There was nothing in his stomach. He hadn't eaten since lunch. But his body still clenched, each spasm making his ribs ache. Yellow-green bile came out of his mouth, spilling on the floor, and the bitter taste spread through his mouth. He sat like that, bent forward, hands still gripping the chair, breathing. Each breath came with a small wheeze from his throat, like his lungs had been punctured. The phone on the floor was still playing. His voice in the video, he didn't know he could make those sounds. The moans, the heavy breathing, and at the end, a long sigh, then silence. Michael reached for the phone. The video had ended. The screen was back to the chat, and under the video was a new message. And just a short clip. The full version is 14 minutes. Who should I send it to first? Your wife, your boss, or your daughter? Michael's fingers shook so much he couldn't type. He stared at the screen, and in his head, names started appearing. The people who would get the video if he didn't pay. Tom Reynolds, his boss. David, who'd asked if he was okay in the meeting. Mrs. Henderson from legal. Then friends, the ones he played golf with, the ones who'd come to his house for dinner, the ones who'd looked at him and Sarah and said, "You guys are the perfect couple." And then Emma. Michael couldn't think about Emma. Every time her name appeared in his head, his brain shut it down, like a fuse blowing to stop the fire from spreading. His phone buzzed again, this time an attachment. Michael opened it. A long list. Hundreds of email addresses, sorted alphabetically. He saw his name, Michael Cole at Cole Arch, com at the top, and underneath were names he recognized immediately. Sarah.Cole, District13.org. Tom Reynolds, ColeArch.com. David.Morrison at ColeArch.com. Then names he didn't recognize, but the email addresses told him who they were. College friends, Hinsdale neighbors, Emma's teachers, and at the bottom, Emma's school email address. Michael put the phone on the desk, face down. He didn't want to look anymore. He sat in the office, darkness around him, the taste of bile still in his mouth, and felt each second pass. 2:24 a.m., 2:25, 2:26. Every second brought him closer to the 24-hour deadline, closer to the moment that video would reach the people he loved. He thought about calling the police, but then he remembered what the man had said in that first call. "I know where you are, I know what you're doing," and he knew that if he called the police, the video would be sent immediately. The guy had said it in an earlier message. One wrong move and it's over. He thought about telling Sarah, but then he looked at the closed door across the hall and he knew she was already in a place where no explanation, even the truth, could reach her. He'd made her wait too long, and now, even if he spoke, she wouldn't know what to believe. He thought about disappearing. The idea came naturally, like a door opening in a room with no exit. Disappear. Leave this house, leave Chicago, leave this life. Leave everything. Sarah, Emma, the job, the debt to the blackmailer, the photos, the video, all of it. He stood up. His legs were shaking, but he walked out of the office, down the hall, down the stairs. He didn't turn on any lights. The familiar darkness of his house, the walls he'd painted 2 years ago, the photos he'd picked out himself, now felt strange, like a museum displaying the life of someone who'd died. In the kitchen, Michael opened the cabinet and took out the whiskey. He didn't use a glass. He drank from the bottle. letting the alcohol burn down his throat, calming the nausea but not calming anything else. He took another sip, then another, until the bottle was a third empty and his head started to spin. He put the bottle on the counter, grabbed the edge, and looked at the back door, where the car keys hung. The keys hung on a hook by the door, next to the house key and the office key. 3 keys, 3 doors, 3 lives. Michael stared at them, and in his head, a voice whispered, "Take the car keys. Open the door. Walk out. Get in the car. Drive anywhere. Just go." He walked to the door. His hand reached for the keys, fingers touching the cold metal, heavy, familiar. He took them off the hook, held them tight in his palm, and felt the grooves press into his skin. He stood at the door, hand on the knob, and looked through the small glass window. Dark lawn, tree shadows swaying in the wind. And in the distance, yellow streetlights. The world outside was still running, still normal, not knowing that inside this house, a man stood at the threshold deciding whether to disappear. He turned the knob. The door opened. Cold night air rushed in, hitting his face, making him shiver. He put one foot outside, shoe touching the cement step, and stood there, half inside, half outside. He looked at the car, the black Audi Q5 in the driveway, under the motion sensor light that had long since turned off. He could walk to it, open the door, sit in the driver's seat, start the engine and drive, and before sunrise, he could be hundreds of miles away. But then he thought, go where? The question hung in his head like a car out of gas in the middle of the desert. He had nowhere to go, no one to call, no plan. He just had a set of keys in his hand, an open door, and a life that had collapsed from the inside. He thought about Emma. She was sleeping upstairs in her pale blue room with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that Michael had put up when she was 5. She would wake up in the morning, come down to the kitchen, and not find him there. She would ask Sarah, "Where's Dad?" And Sarah would have to answer a question she didn't know the answer to. Michael pulled his foot back inside. He was still holding the keys, but he didn't step out. He closed the door, locked it, and stood there, back against the door, feeling his heartbeat in his chest like a door being pounded from inside. He looked at his hand holding the keys. His fingers were white, knuckles showing under the skin. He opened his hand, looked at the keys in his palm, and wondered, is this when I disappear, or is this when I stay and face everything? He didn't have an answer. He only knew he couldn't stand at this threshold forever. And when he looked up the stairs, at the silent darkness, at the room where Sarah was sleeping behind a locked door, at the room where Emma was sleeping under her stars, he knew that whether he chose to go or stay, part of him had been lost long before tonight began. Michael walked into the kitchen, put the keys on the counter, and looked at the half-empty whiskey bottle. He didn't drink more. He just stood there, hands on the counter, head down, breathing. Each breath was heavy, like he was trying to inhale poisoned air. His phone didn't buzz, but Michael knew it was still there, the coiled snake, waiting for morning, waiting for the 24-hour deadline, waiting for him to give an answer he didn't have. He looked up at the kitchen window where the sky was starting to shift from black to dark gray. Almost 4 a.m., sunrise in about 2 hours. And when the first light of the new day hit this house, Michael would still be here, not gone, but not able to stay either. He looked at the keys on the counter, the faint light reflecting off the metal. He didn't pick them up. He just looked and wondered if he'd ever be brave enough to open that door again, not to run away, but to step outside and face what was waiting for him. He didn't have an answer. He just had the keys on the counter, and 24 hours ahead, and a 14-minute video in the phone of a man he'd never met. Michael sat down at the kitchen table, facing the keys, and waited for the light, waited for sunrise, waited for the moment when Sarah would open her door and see him sitting there, and ask the question he still didn't know how to answer. And in the silence of the kitchen before the new day began, Michael Cole, husband, father, lead architect, the man who'd paid over $50,000 to keep a secret, sat looking at his car keys and didn't know if he was brave enough to stay or coward enough to leave. The phone in the bathroom. The shower was still running. Michael had been standing under the hot water too long, his skin starting to turn red. But he couldn't feel the temperature. He just stood there, eyes shut tight, head against the tile, trying to breathe evenly. Somewhere in the house, Sarah was there. She'd said she was going to teach, but Michael wasn't sure about anything anymore. 3 days had passed since the night he stood at the door with the keys. 3 days of constant messages, increasing demands, and silence from Sarah. A silence heavier than any accusation. He turned off the water. Steam filled the room, fogging up the mirror. Michael dried off, wrapped a towel around his waist, and opened the bathroom door. The hallway was quiet. He walked into the bedroom and stopped. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. She was wearing a gray sweatsuit, hair tied low. On her lap were two phones, his and hers. His phone screen was still on, still open to the Messenger app. And from where he stood, Michael could see the blue and gray message bubbles, the endless chat threads. In the middle of the screen, a video was paused, the frame frozen on his face in blue light. Sarah's eyes were red. Not the red of someone who'd just cried, but the red of someone who'd been crying for a long time, so long that her eyes were swollen, the skin around them raw like a burn. But her face was dry, no tears, and in those eyes, Michael saw something that made him stop. Emptiness, a space carved out by what she'd just seen. Sarah's hands rested on the phones, but not gripping them. She just let them sit on her lap, fingers lightly touching the screens, like she was afraid pressing harder would break them. Next to them, her own phone was also on, and Michael could see screenshots. Every message, every transaction, every threat. She'd captured everything. Michael stood in the doorway, towel around his waist, hair still wet. Drops of water from his hair ran down his shoulders, down his chest, cold against skin still warm from the shower. His arms hung at his sides. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Sarah looked up. She looked at him, into his eyes. And Michael felt that look like a knife at his throat. Not the blackmailer's knife. The knife of the woman he'd married, the woman who'd slept beside him for 15 years, the woman who'd trusted him. She spoke. Her voice was strangely cold, not the cold of anger, but the cold of someone who'd been through anger, through tears, and was standing on the other side. Explain. Explain. One word, not loud, not a question, a command. Michael felt his knees give way. He didn't kneel. His legs just couldn't hold him anymore. He sat down on the floor, back against the door frame. The towel slipped off one shoulder, leaving his bare shoulder shaking. He looked at Sarah. She sat on their bed, and in her hands was the phone containing evidence of everything he'd hidden. "I saw everything," Sarah said. Her voice was still calm, but there was a small crack at the end. "I saw all of it, from start to finish." Michael opened his mouth. His throat made no sound. Sarah looked down at the phone, her fingers scrolling across the screen. The light from the screen reflected on her face, highlighting the redness around her eyes. "I've suspected for a while," she said. "The way you came home late, the way you looked at me, the way you stopped looking at me." She paused, took a long breath. "Today, I turned the car around. I came home, you were showering, and I took your phone." She looked at Michael. "The password is Emma's birthday. I've known that for a long time." Michael wanted to speak, wanted to say he'd never changed the password because he didn't think she'd ever check. Wanted to say he thought he was safe, but all those words meant nothing in front of her eyes. "I opened Messenger," Sarah continued, her voice starting to shake. "I saw the account Mia. I opened it, and I read every message." She scrolled with her finger, and Michael saw lines of text flash by. Words he'd written, words he'd received, all appearing under her finger. "From the very first messages," Sarah said. "You're so beautiful. I can't sleep. Home alone, wife's away." She stopped, gripping the phone. "I read every word, every single word." Michael felt tears starting to run down his face. He didn't know when he'd started crying. "Then the video call," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I saw the messages he sent you, the photos, the short video." She looked straight into his eyes. "I saw you, Michael. I saw you doing that." Michael wanted to close his eyes, wanted to disappear, but he couldn't look away. "I watched it," Sarah said, tears starting to fall. "I looked at your phone screen and I saw my husband, the man I've loved for 15 years, doing that to himself. On our bed, while I was away for work." She didn't wipe her tears. She let them fall. "And then I saw the next messages," then she said. "The threats, the demands for money. 20,000, then 15, then 25. Her voice turned sharp and cold. "And 10,000 from our joint account. I saw it in the bank history last week." Michael sat on the floor, towel off his shoulder, water from his wet hair mixing with tears. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. "I knew last week," Sarah repeated. "I knew you took Emma's money. I knew you lied to my mom. I knew everything." She looked at him, and for the first time, Michael saw anger in her eyes. "And I waited. I waited a whole week to see if you'd tell me." She put his phone down on the bed. Her hand shook as she did it. "I waited," she said, her voice cracking into pieces. "Every night you came home late, I waited. Every time you avoided my eyes, I waited. Every time you said, 'I'm fine,' I waited, and you didn't say anything. A sob escaped her throat, but she held it back. She bit her lip, hands clenched on her lap, forcing herself not to break. "Today," she said, her voice choking, "I saw the new message, 50,000, 24 hours, and the email list." She picked up her phone, opened a screenshot. Michael saw the long list of addresses, coworkers, friends, neighbors, and at the end, Emma's name. "I saw our daughter's name," Sarah said, and for the first time, her voice completely broke. "I saw her name at the bottom of the list, and I knew I couldn't wait anymore." She put the phone down. She looked at Michael, and in that moment, he saw her. Not the wife holding herself together, not the woman trying to stay calm. He saw Sarah, hurt so badly she had no strength left to hide it. "I took screenshots of everything," she said. "Every message, every transaction, every threat. I have proof, and I'm calling the police." Michael looked at her. "If we call, he'll send the video. He'll send it whether you pay or not," Sarah cut in. Her voice was colder than ever. "Don't you see? You pay 50,000, he'll ask for 100. You pay 100, he'll ask for 200, until you have nothing left. And then he'll still send the video, because that's how it works." Michael sat on the floor, unable to stand, unable to speak. "I'm not doing this to punish you," Sarah said, her voice starting to crack. "I'm doing this for Emma, because if that video gets sent, she has to live with it. And if we do nothing, she'll live in fear every day, waiting. I won't let her live like that." She picked up her phone and his and stood up from the bed. Michael looked up at her from the floor. She was taller than him right now. "You know," Michael said, his voice a whisper. "You know everything." Sarah looked at him. Tears were still running down her face, but she didn't wipe them. "I know," she said, "and I'm still here. I haven't called the police yet. I'm still waiting for you to talk." Michael opened his mouth. What came out wasn't words, it was a sob from deep in his chest, from the place he'd buried everything for weeks. That sob broke out of his throat like broken glass, and then he couldn't stop. He sat on the bedroom floor, towel across his lap, hair soaking wet, and he cried. He cried like a child, no control, no hiding, letting tears and water from his hair mix together, running down his face, down his neck, down his bare, shaking chest. Sarah didn't walk toward him. She didn't hug him. She stood there, 2 phones in her hands, tears streaming down her face, watching him fall apart. "I'm waiting for you to talk," she said, her voice a whisper. "Talk, Michael. Not for me, for you." Michael looked up at her. Through his tears, he saw her, the woman who'd seen him in the worst possible light, who'd seen what he'd done, who'd seen what he'd hidden. And she was still here. He opened his mouth. This time, sound came out. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking into pieces. "Sarah, I'm so sorry." Sarah looked at him. Tears still fell. But she didn't say anything. She just stood there, waiting. And Michael talked. He talked about that night in March, about the app, about Amanda, about the blue light and his hand and the emptiness. He talked about the fear, about the first messages, about the money he'd transferred. He talked about sitting in his car after work, afraid to come home. He talked about the keys in his hand, the open door, not knowing where to go. He talked about everything, every word, every detail, no hiding, no excuses, just the truth, naked like his body in that video. And when he finished, Sarah sat down on the bed. She put the phones aside. She looked at him, and in her eyes, Michael didn't see emptiness anymore. He saw something else, something even more painful. She hurt, and she was still here. "I'm calling the police," Sarah said, her voice steadier now. "Not because I want to punish you, because it's the only way to protect Emma. To protect us." Michael nodded. He had no strength left to fight, no desire to fight. "I'm here," Sarah said, and it wasn't a promise. It was just a statement about the present. "Right now, I'm here. The rest, I don't know." She picked up the phone. Michael watched her from the floor, feeling each heartbeat in his chest. Sarah dialed. She put the phone to her ear, and Michael heard the first ring from the speaker. He sat there, on the bedroom floor, towel still around his waist, tears still on his face, and for the first time in weeks, he wasn't thinking about running. He was thinking about Emma, about Sarah, about what he'd done and what he needed to do to fix it, if that was still possible. "Hello," Sarah said into the phone. "I want to report a blackmail case." Michael closed his eyes, and when he opened them, Sarah was still sitting there, still talking to the police, still here. That was all he could hope for right now. The showdown. The police had been gone for 20 minutes. They'd taken statements, copied messages, taken screenshots, and promised to follow up within 48 hours. A detective named Linda Park had told Michael he wasn't the first person this had happened to, and he wouldn't be the last. She said it without judgment. But Michael still felt himself shrink, like a snail pulled out of its shell. Now they were alone, Michael and Sarah, in the living room where they'd hosted friends, where Emma had learned to walk, where family photos hung on the walls like proof of a life that was over. Michael sat on the couch, dressed now, a t-shirt and sweatpants Sarah had given him when the police came. His hands rested on his lap, fingers intertwined, squeezed so tight his knuckles were white. He didn't dare look at Sarah. Sarah sat in the chair across from him, about 6 feet away. That distance, 6 feet, was bigger than any distance they'd ever had. She sat straight, hands on her knees, and looked at him with eyes still red but dry. "The police want you to cooperate," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, but there was distance in it, like she was talking to a coworker, not her husband. "They said you won't be charged for the content. You're the victim in the blackmail case, but they need your help to find him." Michael nodded. He still wasn't looking at her. "I'll be with you for that," Sarah said. And Michael heard a slight tremble in her voice. "I'll go to the station with you. I'll help you remember what they need." "I'll do that." Michael looked up. Sarah was looking at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his chest tighten. Not tenderness, not forgiveness, but resolve. She'd decided to stay, at least until this was over. "But after," Sarah said, and her voice cracked a little, "I don't know." Michael felt those 2 words, "I don't know," like a hand on his chest, not pressing hard, but enough to know it was there. She was quiet for a moment. Michael heard the clock on the wall, cars outside, the heat from the fireplace. All the normal sounds of the house. But today they sounded like sounds in a room that was changing. "I have questions," Sarah said, "and I need answers, not to hurt you. I need to understand." Michael nodded. He was ready. He thought he was ready for anything she asked. Sarah looked at him. Her eyes didn't blink. "Why?" One word, but heavier than any question Michael had ever heard. He opened his mouth. Answers spun in his head because he was lonely, because Sarah traveled for work, because he couldn't sleep, because he wanted to feel wanted, and because he was stupid, because he was weak. All true and all not enough. "I don't know," he finally said. His voice was hoarse. "I thought I knew, but I don't." Sarah looked at him. She didn't say anything. She waited. "I wasn't sleeping much," Michael said, the words pouring out like water breaking through a dam. "You were traveling more. Emma got older and didn't need me like before. Work was fine, but I felt like I wasn't myself anymore." He stopped, trying to breathe. "Then I downloaded that app," he said. "At first just to look, to feel like someone noticed me. Then someone messaged. Then they complimented me, and I didn't stop." Sarah sat still, not moving, but Michael saw her hands on her knees start to clench. That night," Michael said, his voice starting to break. "That night in March, you were away. Emma was at a friend's. I was home alone, and I did it. I did the video call." He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he still saw blue light, still saw his hand, still saw the woman's blurred face. "I didn't know she was recording," he said. "I didn't know. But that doesn't make it different, does it? I did it. I let it happen." Sarah didn't answer. Michael opened his eyes. She was looking at him, and on her face, another tear started to fall. "How many times?" Sarah asked. Her voice was a whisper. Michael looked at her. He knew she wasn't just asking about the video call. She was asking about everything. The nights he sat in his car, the times he looked at his phone instead of her, the times he said, "I'm fine," when he wasn't. "Just once," he said, "just one video call. But the messages, I messaged a lot of people. I talked to them. I don't know what I was looking for. And I didn't stop." Sarah nodded, a slow nod, like she was placing each piece of information in its right place. "Do you love me?" That question, 3 simple words, fell into the space between them like a stone dropped in a well. Michael felt it hit the bottom of his chest, and the echo made it hard to breathe. "Yes," he said, and his voice broke. "I love you. I never stopped loving you. I can't explain it, but I love you. I've always loved you." Sarah looked at him. Tears were falling, but she didn't wipe them. She let them fall. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't understand how someone can love and do that. How someone can sleep next to me, say, 'I love you,' and then do that." Michael wanted to say he didn't understand either. Wanted to say he'd asked himself that question 100 times, 1,000 times, and never found the answer. Wanted to say his love for her was real. And what he had done was also real, and both truths lived inside him, and it was killing him every day. But he couldn't say it. He just sat there, tears running down his face, looking at Sarah, the woman he loved, the woman he'd betrayed, and felt the 6 feet between them, like a canyon. "I thought," Sarah said, her voice choking, "I thought there was someone else. I prepared myself for that. I thought if you had someone else, I would..." I don't know what I would do, but I thought about it. But this... She didn't finish. She put her hand to her face, wiping tears, but they kept coming. I don't know if this is worse or just different, she said. There's no one else. It's just you. And a phone. And a stranger. Michael felt each of her words like cuts. And he knew she was right. He wasn't looking for someone else. He was looking for something in himself. Something he'd lost. Something he couldn't find next to Sarah. Something he couldn't find in this house. And when he found it in the blue light of a phone screen, he didn't realize he was losing everything. I'm sorry, Michael said. His voice broke. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Don't call me that. Sarah's voice cut through the air, not yelling, but sharp like a blade. Michael went silent. He looked at her and saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Don't call me Sarah, she repeated, her voice shaking. Not now. Not when I don't know who I am to you. Not when I don't know what we are. She stopped, took a deep breath. Answer the question, she said, and don't apologize. Answer. Michael nodded. He wiped his face with his sleeve, tried to steady his shaking body. I love you, he said, slower this time, trying to control each word. I loved you from the first day I met you. I loved you when you wore your wedding dress. I loved you when Emma was born. I loved you when you stayed up late grading papers. I loved you when you laughed. I loved you when you were angry. I love you. He stopped to breathe. And I did that, he said. I don't know why, I can't explain it, but I love you. That doesn't change. No matter what I did, that doesn't change. Sarah looked at him. Tears still ran down her face, but she didn't wipe them. She sat still, looking at him. And Michael felt her weighing every word he'd said, putting them on a scale with what she'd seen on his phone. I believe you, she finally said. Her voice was a whisper. I believe you love me. That's what hurts most. She stood up from the chair. Michael looked at her, heart pounding. I'm not leaving, Sarah said, like she was reading his thoughts. Not today. I said I'd be with you through this, and I will. She walked toward the door, but stopped at the threshold. Her back was to him. But I need time, she said. Her voice choked. I need time to understand. To know if I can look at you without seeing that. To know if we can get through this. Michael sat still on the couch, hands on his lap, not daring to move. Sarah turned back to look at him. The light from the window hit her face, and Michael saw her. Not the perfect wife in the photos, not the woman in the black dress at the company party. He saw a woman who'd just been through the worst thing a wife could go through, and was still standing there, still intact. The police want you to cooperate, Sarah said, her voice steadier now. I'll be with you for that. I'll go to the station with you. I'll sit next to you when you talk to them. I'll do that. She looked at him for a moment. But after, she said, and her voice cracked one last time, I don't know. I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if I can forget. I don't know if when I look at you, I'll see my husband or I'll see that man on the phone screen. Michael felt each, I don't know, like cracks in ice. He wanted to run to her, wanted to hold her, wanted to say everything would be okay, that he'd do anything to fix it, that he'd spend the rest of his life proving he deserved her. But he did nothing. He sat still because he knew that right now his promises meant nothing. He'd promised her once, on their wedding day, in front of friends and family, and he'd broken it. Not by being with someone else, but by letting himself become someone who couldn't look her in the eye. Sarah stood in the doorway looking at him, and in her eyes, Michael saw something that made him feel both relief and pain. She was still here. She hadn't left. She would be with him when he faced the police, when he had to look back at the messages, when he had to remember every detail. But after, she promised nothing. And Michael knew he had no right to ask her to promise anything. I'm staying in Emma's room tonight, Sarah said. I need to be alone. Michael nodded. He wanted to say Sarah, but he remembered what she'd said and held it in his throat. Sarah turned away. Michael heard her go up the stairs, each step slow, heavy. He heard Emma's door open, then close. And he sat there in the living room where they'd watched movies together, where they'd held each other on the couch on winter nights, where they'd been the couple everyone called the golden couple. He looked at the photo on the wall, their family picture from last summer. Emma in the middle, hair blowing in the wind, Sarah's arm around him, all three of them smiling. He looked at his own face in the photo. The man who didn't know that, 11 months later, he'd be sitting in this room alone, waiting. He didn't know how long he sat there, until the light outside shifted from gold to gray, and darkness started filling the corners of the room. His phone didn't buzz. No messages from the unknown number. The police had taken the evidence, and Michael had blocked the number like they told him. The silence from his phone, for the first time in weeks, wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a door that had closed. But in this house, another door had opened. The door between him and Sarah. And Michael didn't know if it would ever close again. He sat in the dark, listening to the wind through the trees outside, and wondered, will there ever be a day when Sarah looks at me and doesn't see the man on that phone screen? Will there ever be a day when we sit on this couch again and she puts her hand on mine? And it's not an act of forgiveness, but just because she wants to touch me? He didn't have an answer. He only had the silence of the house, the stairs no one was coming down, and a family photo on the wall where 3 people were smiling at a man who no longer existed. The night before the sting, the house was pitch black when the clock on the nightstand showed 1:47 a.m. Michael lay on the bed in his office, where he'd been sleeping all these nights, eyes wide open staring at the ceiling. He'd been lying there since 10 p.m., 3 hours and 47 minutes. He counted every minute, every second, like someone trapped under rubble, listening to rescue footsteps in the distance. Tomorrow morning, he would go to the police station. He would sit in a small room with Detective Linda Park and Sarah beside him. He would open his phone, point out the messages, try to remember every detail about the woman named Amanda, about the man's voice on that first call, about anything that could help them find him. And in his head, one question echoed without stopping. Will he send the video before the police can do anything? He sat up, his body felt heavy as lead, each vertebra cracking as he turned. He looked out the window. The sky was pitch black, no stars, like a thick blanket pulled too tight. He opened his desk drawer. Inside were blank white paper, a blue pen, and a white envelope. He looked at them for a moment, then took them out. This was something he'd been thinking about for days, a letter, just in case. In case the video got sent before the police could stop it. In case Emma, 13-year-old Emma, his daughter, the kid who still had glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling, had to see her father in the worst possible light. Michael put the paper in front of him. His hand shook as he held the pen. He stared at the blank paper, and in his head 1,000 sentences spun around, but all of them died before he could write them down. My dearest Emma, those 2 words. He looked at them and tears started to fall. He kept writing. If you're reading this, then I did something I never wanted you to see. I was wrong. I was wrong long before you ever found out. His hand shook so much, the words on the page weren't straight anymore. He stopped, put the pen down, wiped his face. His nose was stuffed up, his breathing wheezy. He looked out the window. The darkness was still there. He thought about Emma. When she was born, 6 pounds, lying in his arms like a fragile package. When she was 3, running to hug his leg every time he came home. When she was 8, crying when he had to travel for work. Now, 13 years old, almost as tall as her mom, hair in a ponytail, and still those glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. He picked up the pen again. I hurt Mom, I hurt our family, and I let a stranger be able to hurt you. That's something I will never forgive myself for. Tears dripped onto the paper, smudging a few words. He didn't wipe them. He let them stay. Now, you don't have to forgive me. You don't have to understand. You just need to know one thing. I love you. I loved you from the first second I saw you. And no matter what you think of me after reading this, that never changes. He stopped. His nose was so stuffed he had to breathe through his mouth. He looked at the words he'd written, and they seemed too few, too small for everything he wanted to say. And I hope someday you can forgive me. Not because I deserve it, I don't, but because I don't want you to carry this with you. I want you to live your life, not weighed down by what I did. He wrote one more section, the last words. You're the best thing I ever did in my life. I'm sorry I messed it up. I love you, always. Dad. He put the pen down. The paper in front of him was stained with tear marks, but the words were still readable. He folded it, put it in the envelope, and wrote on the front, for Emma, only open if I'm not home. He held the envelope in his hand, feeling its weight, light but heavier than anything he'd ever held. He looked around the room, looking for a place to put it. Desk drawer? No, Sarah might find it. Bookshelf? No, Emma never looked there. Finally, he put it under Emma's pillow, where she would find it if something happened, but where no one would see it by accident. He stood up, knees cracking. He walked out to the hallway, moving slowly to stay quiet. The hallway was pitch black, but he knew which floorboards creaked, which doors opened quietly. He'd lived in this house long enough to know it by heart. He opened Emma's door. She was asleep, her pink blanket pulled up, one arm outside the covers, her long, thin fingers like her mom's. Light from the hallway came in, just enough for Michael to see her face. Peaceful, carefree, like nothing in the world could wake her. He walked to her bed, gently lifted the pillow, put the envelope underneath, and put the pillow back. She didn't move. Michael stood there looking at Emma, and in that moment, he wanted to wake her up, wanted to hold her, wanted to tell her everything, but he didn't. He had no right to take away her peace, even for one night. He went back to the hallway, closed the door, and walked toward his office. But when he passed his and Sarah's bedroom, he stopped. The door was shut tight. No light came through the crack. Sarah had said she'd sleep in Emma's room, but Michael knew she'd gone back to her own room tonight. He'd heard the door close. He stood in front of the door, hand raised to knock. Wanted to tell her he was scared. Wanted to ask her if she'd really go with him tomorrow. Wanted to hear her voice, even just a few words. But he didn't knock. He stood there, hand in the air in front of the door, then lowered it. He went back to his office, closed the door, and sat in his chair. He didn't turn on the light. He sat in the darkness, looking out the window, waiting. Around 3 a.m., Michael heard a noise. Not from Sarah's room, from Emma's. The door opened softly, and the light from the hallway came out. Michael sat still, not breathing. Soft footsteps in the hallway. Emma, barefoot. Those familiar steps Michael had been hearing since she was 3. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. The door opened. Emma stood in the doorway wearing pale blue pajamas, hair messy, eyes still sleepy. Her hands were empty. She just stood there, looking at her father sitting in the dark. "Dad?" Her voice was soft, like she was afraid of breaking the night. Michael wiped his face quickly, but he knew she'd seen. Emma's eyes were still sharp as always, and she'd seen the tears on his face. "Emma," Michael said, trying to make his voice sound normal, but it cracked on the first word. "Why aren't you asleep?" Emma didn't answer that question. She walked into the room, slow steps, and stood in front of him. Michael looked up at her from his chair, and he saw that Emma was much taller than last year. Standing up, she was almost as tall as him sitting down. "I heard you crying," Emma said. Michael wanted to say, "I'm fine." Those words were on his lips, ready to come out like a reflex. But when he looked into his daughter's eyes, he couldn't say it. Not because she wouldn't believe him, but because he didn't want to tell one more lie, no matter how small. "I'm not fine," Michael said, his voice shook. "But you don't need to worry, I'll be fine." Emma looked at him. In those 13-year-old eyes, Michael saw something that hurt and relieved him at the same time. She didn't ask why. She didn't demand answers. She just stood there in front of him, looking at him with the eyes of a child who'd learned that sometimes grown-ups cry too. "Dad, Emma hesitated. She looked at the floor, then back at him. "I don't know what's going on," Emma said, her voice getting smaller. "Mom won't tell me, but I saw her crying yesterday. And I saw you crying just now." Michael wanted to tell her everything would be okay. Wanted to say this was just a hard time, and their family would get through it. But he couldn't promise that. He didn't know if it was true. "I'm sorry," Michael said. "I'm sorry you had to see this." Emma shook her head. "You don't have to be sorry for that." She stepped closer and sat on the floor in front of him, like when she was little, when they used to read books together in this room. She sat cross-legged, hands on her knees, looking up at him. "I don't know what you did," Emma said, her voice lower. "But I know you're sad, and I know Mom's sad, and I don't know what to do." Michael looked at his daughter, the child he used to hold in his arms, the child he taught to ride a bike, the child he sang to every night. And he felt something shift. She wasn't a little kid who needed him to protect her from the world anymore. She was standing in the middle of that world, trying to understand. "You don't need to do anything," Michael said. "This is between me and Mom. You just be you. Do your homework, hang out with your friends, do what you always do." Emma looked at him. Her eyes didn't move. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. Michael looked at his daughter. He wanted to say yes, wanted to say "I'm fine," but he'd told enough lies. "Not yet," he said, "but I'm going to try." Emma nodded. She stood up and Michael thought she'd go back to her room. But she didn't. She leaned down and wrapped her arms around him. That hug, light, quick, but tight enough, made Michael unable to breathe. He felt her messy hair on his shoulder, the familiar smell of shampoo, the warmth of a small body that wasn't so small anymore. "I love you, Dad," Emma said, her voice a whisper into his shoulder. "No matter what you did." Michael sat still, not daring to move, not daring to breathe. Those words, "no matter what you did," like a rope thrown down into the pit where he was falling. He wanted to tell her she didn't know what she was saying, wanted to say if she knew the truth, she wouldn't say those words. But he didn't say anything. He just sat there in the dark of his office, letting his daughter hold him. Emma let go. She looked at him, eyes still sleepy, but there was something in them Michael had never seen before. "Go to sleep, Dad," Emma said. "I'll make breakfast in the morning." Michael wanted to smile, but more tears came. He nodded. Emma turned to the door. She stopped, looked back at him one last time. "I love you, Dad," she said again. "I'll always love you, no matter what." Then she walked into the hallway, closed the door, and Michael heard her bare feet go back to her room. The door closed softly, and then silence. He sat in the darkness, his arms still in the shape of the hug. He could still feel his daughter's warmth on his shoulder. He looked out the window where the sky was starting to shift from black to dark gray. He thought about the letter under Emma's pillow. He thought about whether he should take it out. And then he decided to leave it there. Not because he thought it would be needed, but because writing it had helped him see one thing clearly. He never wanted Emma to read it. He wanted to be there with her, to watch her grow up, to be there when she graduated, when she got married, when she had kids of her own. And to do that, he had to get through tomorrow. Cooperate with the police, face what happened, live with the truth, with Sarah, with Emma, with himself. Michael stood up. He walked to the window and opened the curtains. Outside, the first rays of sunrise were slipping through gray clouds, painting the horizon pale orange. He looked at that light and thought about Emma, about her eyes when she said, "No matter what you did." And for the first time in weeks, Michael felt something other than fear, not hope. Hope was still too far away. But a small light, like those first sunbeams in a dark sky. He went back to the desk and looked at the blank paper left. He didn't write anything else. He just put his hand on it, felt the cold surface, and thought, "I won't need it. I'll be there with her." He didn't know if that was true, but he needed to believe it, because without that belief, he couldn't leave this room, couldn't drive to the police station, couldn't sit down next to Sarah and face what was waiting. Michael looked at the clock. 5:23 a.m. Almost light. In a few hours, he'd be sitting in a small room and everything would begin. He didn't know how it would end, but he knew one thing. There was a 13-year-old kid in a room with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. A kid who just told him she loved him no matter what. And that, even though it couldn't undo what he'd done, was enough to make him stand up. Michael opened the office door and walked into the hallway. He passed Emma's room, door closed, silent. He passed his and Sarah's bedroom, also closed, also silent. He went downstairs, into the kitchen, and turned on the light. He got the coffee and made a pot. While waiting for the water to boil, he stood by the window, where light was slowly spreading, pushing the darkness away bit by bit. And when the coffee started to drip, Michael heard a noise upstairs. The bedroom door opened. Sarah's footsteps, slow, tired, started coming down the stairs. Michael didn't turn around. He stood by the window, waiting. And when Sarah walked into the kitchen, he felt her presence behind him, like warmth in a cold room. "You want coffee?" Michael asked, his voice rough but not broken. Sarah didn't answer right away. Michael heard her pull out a chair and sit at the table. "Yes," she said. "Make me a cup." Michael poured coffee into 2 cups, put sugar in Sarah's the way she liked it, and brought them to the table. He put the cup in front of her, then sat in the chair across. Sarah looked at the coffee, then at him. Her eyes were still red, dark circles underneath, but she was dressed, a white shirt and black pants. She was ready. "Emma came down to my room," Sarah said. "She asked me what was wrong." Michael looked at her. "What did you say?" Sarah took a sip of coffee. "I said I'd tell her later. Now's not the time." Michael nodded. They sat in the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee between them, light from the window slowly getting brighter. Neither spoke, but Michael felt Sarah's presence. Not the warmth of a wife, not the closeness of a partner. A different presence. The steadiness of someone who'd promised to stay and was keeping that promise. "Thank you," Michael said. Sarah looked at him. "For what?" "For being here this morning, for everything." Sarah looked at him for a moment, then turned to the window. The sunrise hit her face, highlighting her features, high cheekbones, tight lips, and eyes still red but dry. "I'm not doing this for you," Sarah said. "I'm doing this for Emma, and because I promised." Michael nodded. He didn't expect more. They sat a little longer in the morning silence, waiting. Waiting for Emma to wake up, waiting for when they'd have to leave this house, waiting for the final confrontation to begin. And in that silence, Michael thought about the last words he'd written in the letter under Emma's pillow. "I hope someday you can forgive me." He didn't know if that would happen. But when he looked at Sarah sitting across from him, looking at her half-empty coffee cup, he knew that today, at least, he wouldn't run, he would stay. And that was the first step. The arrest and the truth revealed. The police car was parked at the corner, 2 blocks from the meeting spot. Michael sat in the back seat, hands on his lap, fingers intertwined so tight his knuckles were white. Sarah sat next to him, also silent, also rigid. In front of them, Detective Linda Park was talking on her radio with a low, steady voice, like a surgeon reading vital signs. "He'll be here in 15 minutes, Linda said, turning to look at them. "We've secured the area. Mr. Cole, just do exactly what we told you. Go to the spot, drop the money, come back to the car. We'll handle the rest." Michael nodded, and his throat was dry. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He looked at the brown paper bag on the front seat. Inside was $50,000 in real marked bills provided by the police. More money than he'd ever held. But right now it was just a tool in a game much bigger than him. "You okay?" Linda asked. Michael didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the empty parking lot of the closed mall, at the streetlights starting to come on as dusk fell. This was where he'd chosen. An empty lot, no security cameras, no people passing through. He'd done this before, Linda said. "I'm okay," Michael said, and he was surprised his voice didn't break. Sarah beside him said nothing. But Michael felt her hand. She'd put it on the back of his hand at some point, her fingers cold, light, not squeezing, just resting there, like a reminder that she was still here. He didn't dare look at her. He was afraid if he looked, he wouldn't be able to get out of the car. Linda looked at her watch, and 5 minutes. Michael opened the car door. Cold night air rushed in, making him shiver, and he stepped out, legs shaking, and felt the rough, cold asphalt under his shoes. He walked forward, each step like stepping into an abyss. He heard the car door close behind him. The sound echoed in the empty lot like a gunshot. He didn't turn back. He walked to the blue trash can at the corner of the lot where he'd been told to go by text message. He put the brown paper bag next to the trash can as agreed and stood up. And in that moment, he wanted to turn back. Wanted to run to the car, pull Sarah out of here, go home and lock the doors and never come out again. But his legs didn't move. He stood there looking at the brown paper bag next to the trash can and waited. He didn't hear the car coming. He just saw headlights suddenly appear at the end of the lot, shining straight into his eyes, making him squint. A gray sedan, old, plates smudged. It stopped about 30 feet away, and Michael saw a man get out. He was young. That was the first thing Michael noticed. Much younger than he'd expected. A guy, maybe 24, 25 years old, wearing a black hoodie, jeans, sneakers. He wasn't tall, wasn't big, didn't look scary. He looked like a college student, a dropout. Someone Michael might see at a coffee shop or on the bus. He walked quickly toward the bag. Michael watched him, and in his head a voice whispered, "That's him. That's the guy who made me afraid for weeks. He's just a kid." He bent down to pick up the bag, and right then, lights came on from every direction. Michael heard sirens, engines, shoes running on asphalt. Police cars from 3 directions raced in, red and blue lights spinning, and voices yelled, "Police, don't move, hands on your head." Michael stood still, not breathing. He watched the young man. His face was pale under the red and blue lights, eyes wide, mouth open. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He just stood there, hands up, the bag falling to the ground. And Michael saw an expression on his face he didn't expect. Relief. He looked like someone who'd just been set free. 3 officers ran up, threw him to the ground, cuffed his hands behind his back. Michael heard the metal of the handcuffs, the guy's heavy breathing, an officer reading his rights. And in all those sounds, Michael just looked at the young man's face lying on the asphalt. A pale face, sweating, but not the face of a cornered animal. The face of someone who'd been waiting for this for a long time. Michael didn't know how long he stood there, until Linda Park appeared in front of him, put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Mr. Cole, it's over. Get back in the car." Michael turned and walked back to the police car. He heard doors close, engines start, sirens one last time. He opened the door, got in the back, and looked at Sarah. She was still sitting in the same spot, hands on her lap, but this time she was looking at him. Her eyes weren't red and swollen like before. They were looking at him with an expression Michael couldn't read. Not tenderness, not forgiveness, but not distance either. She just looked at him, and Michael felt that look like a thin rope connecting them in the darkness. "It's over," Michael said. His voice was rough. Sarah nodded. She didn't say anything, but when the car started moving, her hand found his, and this time she held on tight. At the police station, the fluorescent lights made everything look pale and cold. Michael sat in a small room on a hard plastic chair, a computer in front of him. Linda Park sat next to him, hand on the mouse. Sarah sat on his other side, still holding his hand. "Mr. Cole," Linda said, professional but not cold, "we need you to confirm that this is the video used to blackmail you. I know this isn't easy, but it's necessary for the record. Michael looked at the black screen. He knew what was inside. He'd seen the photos, seen the short clip the night he was asked for $50,000. But he'd never watched the whole thing. Never sat in a bright room with a detective and his wife and purposely opened it. You don't have to watch it all, Linda said, like she was reading his thoughts. We just need you to confirm this is from your call. You can stop any time. Michael nodded. He felt Sarah's hand squeeze tighter. He didn't look at her. He looked at the screen and said, "Play it." Linda pressed play. The screen lit up. Michael saw his bedroom, the view from Amanda's phone camera, slightly tilted, blue light from the computer screen. He saw himself walk into the frame wearing a white shirt and gray pants. He saw himself sit on the edge of the bed. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. Sweat ran down his back, soaking his shirt. He wanted to close his eyes, wanted to look away, but he didn't. For the first time, he looked straight at it. On the screen, he started unbuttoning his shirt. Michael looked at his own face in the video. Bright eyes, lips slightly open, and on that face an expression he didn't recognize. It wasn't the face of the man he thought he was. It was the face of someone doing something he knew was wrong but couldn't stop. He saw himself take off his shirt, take off his pants, sit on the edge of the bed in his gray underwear. Then he saw his hands start to move. "Stop," Michael said. Linda paused. The screen froze on his image, sitting on the bed, legs spread, hand between his thighs. Michael looked at it, and in his head something broke. "That's me," he said, his voice broke. "That's the video. I confirm it." Linda nodded, wrote in her notebook. She didn't ask anything else. She just looked at him with the eyes of someone who'd seen this many times before. Sarah beside him wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at the table, still holding his hand. And Michael felt her hand shaking. Not shaking from fear, shaking because she was trying to stay calm, trying not to fall apart. Linda closed the computer. She turned her chair toward them, and Michael saw a different expression on her face. Not professional detective, but something serious, almost respectful. "Mr. Cole, I need to tell you something," she said. "We found Marcus Webb's files on his computer. You're victim number 7. Michael looked at her. "Number 7? He started 2 years ago," Linda said, her voice lower. "All men, all with families, all lured through dating apps, same method as with you." She paused, looking at her hands for a moment. "Of the 6 victims before you," she said, 3 killed themselves." Michael felt those 3 words like 3 knives in his chest. 3 killed themselves. He looked at Linda, and in his head, a question echoed. "What stopped me?" "They didn't have anyone," Linda said, like she was answering his unasked question. "They didn't tell their wives. They didn't tell anyone. They kept it to themselves, and when they ran out of money, when they couldn't see a way out, they chose to end it." Michael sat still. He felt each of her words like stones dropped in water, ripples spreading, touching him. Sarah, everyone. "You're lucky," Linda said, and she looked at Sarah, the woman still sitting still holding his hand, still not looking away from the table. "You're lucky your wife was here." Michael turned to look at Sarah. She was still looking at the table, but Michael saw tears running down her face. She didn't wipe them, she didn't say anything, but her hand held his tighter than ever. Linda stood up. "We're keeping him. With the evidence you provided, he's facing multiple charges. You don't have to worry about the video being released. We've seized everything." She looked at Michael for a moment, then at Sarah. "You can go home," she said. "Thank you for cooperating." She left the room, closing the door, leaving them alone in the small room under the white fluorescent lights. Michael sat still, not moving. He looked at Sarah's hand holding his. Long, thin fingers, short nails, her wedding ring still on her finger. He looked at that ring and thought about the 3 men who died. The men who didn't have Sarah. The men who sat in a room like this, or in their cars, or on the edge of their beds, and no one held their hand. "Sarah," Michael said, his voice a whisper. Sarah didn't tell him not to call her that. She just sat still, tears still falling. "I thought about doing it," Michael said, and he felt those words leave his mouth like something held back too long. "The night I had the keys, I was going to drive away. Not to run, I was going to—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Sarah turned to look at him. Her eyes were red, but there was no pity in them. There was something else, something Michael couldn't name, but it made him unable to look away. "But you didn't," Sarah said. Her voice was a whisper. "Because of Emma," Michael said. "Because I thought about her. Because I couldn't let her wake up and not find her dad." Sarah looked at him. And in that moment, Michael saw something change in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but recognition. She looked at him, and he knew she was seeing him. Not the man on the screen, not the liar, but the man who chose to stay. 3 men, Sarah said, her voice shaking. 3 men. They didn't have anyone. Michael nodded. Sarah looked at him for a moment, then raised her hand to her face and wiped her tears. She stood up and Michael thought she'd leave the room, but she didn't. She stood in front of him, looking down, and held out her hand. Let's go home, she said. Michael looked at her hand. He didn't know what she was giving him, forgiveness, acceptance, or just another day to live. But he took her hand, stood up, and felt her fingers interlock with his. They left the room, walked down the long hallway, past closed doors, past flickering fluorescent lights. When they got to the parking lot, the cold night air hit them, and Michael breathed. He looked up at the sky. For the first time in many nights, he saw stars. Not many, just a few small points of light between gray clouds. But they were there. Sarah opened the car door and got in the driver's seat. Michael sat next to her. They didn't talk as the car left the lot. Drove down familiar roads, past dark intersections, past houses with their lights off. Michael looked out the window at the trees passing by and thought about the 3 men who died. He didn't know their names, didn't know their faces. But he knew how they felt, the feeling of sitting in the dark, alone, with no way out. He'd been there. He'd stood at the door, keys in his hand, and only Emma, only his daughter's voice in his head had made him stop. The car turned onto their street, trees on both sides, big houses with trimmed lawns. The car pulled into the driveway. Michael looked at his house. The light in Emma's room was still on, a small glow in the darkness. Sarah turned off the engine. They sat in the car for a moment, neither opening their door. I'm going to tell Emma, Sarah said, her voice low. Not everything, but enough for her to understand. She needs to know. Michael nodded. He had no right to object. Sarah looked at him. And you need to talk to someone, a professional. I can't be the only person you talk to, not right now. Michael looked at her. I will. Sarah nodded. She opened the door and got out. Michael opened his door, stood up, and felt his feet touch the driveway asphalt. Where he'd stood 1,000 times, where he'd watched Emma run to the school bus, where he'd waited for Sarah to come home. They walked inside. Michael looked up the stairs and saw a light coming from Emma's room. He wanted to go up, wanted to open the door, wanted to hug his daughter, but he didn't. He stood at the bottom, looking up, and felt her presence like a lighthouse in the darkness. Sarah stood beside him. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, and Michael felt her. Not a wife, not a partner, but someone who had decided to stay, at least tonight. Thank you, Michael said, for being there today and for being here. Sarah looked at him. Her eyes were still tired, but there was something in them Michael had never seen before. Not forgiveness, but recognition that he hadn't run, that he'd faced it, that he'd sat in that small room and looked straight at the video and didn't look away. I'm not doing this for you, Sarah said, like she'd said that morning. But this time her voice wasn't cold. I'm doing this because I don't want to be one of those 3 men's wives, the ones who didn't get a chance. She turned and went up the stairs. Michael watched her from below, and when she got to the hallway, she stopped and looked back at him. Go to sleep, Michael, she said. Tomorrow starts again. Then she went into the bedroom and closed the door. Not hard, not soft, just closed, like any other night. Michael stood downstairs in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. He heard water running in the bathroom, Sarah washing her face. He heard Emma turn a page in her book upstairs. He heard his own heartbeat, slowing, steadying. He thought about the 3 men who died, the ones without Sarah, the ones without Emma, the ones who sat in the dark, keys in hand, with no one to call them back. Michael went upstairs. He passed Emma's room. The light was still on, and through the crack in the door, he saw her sitting on her bed reading, hair in a ponytail, lips moving silently with the words. He didn't knock. He just stood there, looking at her through the narrow crack, and felt the warmth from that room like a nameless light. He went into his office and closed the door. He didn't turn on the light. He sat in his chair, looking out the window at the night sky getting darker. He thought about the car keys in his hand, the open door, the question, where to go. He had the answer now. Not where to go, where to stay. Stay with Emma. Stay with Sarah, if she'd let him. Stay with this life, even though it was broken into pieces. Michael didn't know if those pieces could be put back together. He didn't know if Sarah would ever look at him without seeing the man on the screen. He didn't know if he'd ever look in the mirror and not see that face. But he knew one thing. Tonight, he wasn't holding the car keys. He wasn't standing at the door. He was sitting in this room, in this house, listening to his daughter turn pages, listening to his wife wash her face, listening to the sound of a life still breathing. And that was enough, at least for tonight. 3 months later, Dartmouth Holloway's office was on the 2nd floor of an old building on Maple Street. about a 15-minute drive from their house. Michael had been there 11 times, alone for the first 8 weeks, and 3 times recently with Sarah. Every time he walked through the cream-painted wooden door, he still felt a knot in his chest. But it wasn't as tight as the first time. Today, late autumn sunlight came through the big windows, making long stripes on the wood floor. Michael sat in the gray armchair on the left. Sarah sat in the chair across from him, the space between them just big enough for a third person to sit. Dr. Holloway sat between them on a low swivel chair, hands on his knees, his face calm with neatly trimmed gray beard. Michael looked at Sarah. She was wearing a light blue sweater, her hair longer than 3 months ago, now down to the middle of her back. She sat straight, hands on her lap, looking at the painting on the opposite wall, an abstract piece with patches of blue and gray, like a sky before a storm. Today we're going to talk about what's changed in the last 3 months, Dr. Holloway said, his voice low, steady, like a distant cello. Michael, do you want to start? Michael looked at him, then at Sarah. She didn't turn to look at him, but he saw her hands on her lap tighten slightly. I went back to work, Michael said. Not full-time, 3 days a week. Tom, my boss, he said I could work from home if I needed to, but I wanted to get out, wanted to feel like I was still part of something. Dr. Holloway nodded. And how does that feel, being back at the office? Michael remembered his first day back. David had stood at the door to greet him, didn't ask anything, just put a hand on his shoulder. The others too. They knew he'd been through something, but no one asked. Tom had sent an email to the whole company, saying Michael was dealing with a personal issue and needed time. No one asked more. That politeness made Michael feel both relieved and alone. Weird, Michael said, but good. I needed to get out of the house, needed to feel like I could still do something. Dr. Holloway turned to Sarah. Sarah, how has that change affected you? Sarah didn't answer right away. She was still looking at the painting, and Michael felt her silence like an underground river. I'm glad he's going out, she finally said. When he's home, I feel, I don't know, like there's a shadow. It's not that I don't want him there. I just don't know how to be around him. Her voice was calm, but Michael heard the slight shake at the end. He wanted to say something, but Dr. Holloway looked at him and gave a small shake of his head. Let her talk. When he's at work, Sarah said, I have my own space. I can think, breathe, I can not forget, but I can stop thinking about it for a while. She stopped. Michael looked at her hands. Long, thin fingers, no ring. She'd taken her ring off 2 months ago, after a night when they fought about whether Michael should call her mom to explain. The ring was still in her nightstand drawer, Michael knew, because he'd seen it when he was cleaning. How are you and Emma? Dr. Holloway asked. Sarah turned to look at him, and Michael saw a slight softening on her face. The softness that only came when she talked about their daughter. Emma's okay, she said. She knows something happened. I told her dad met a bad person and that person took advantage of him and now it's over. I didn't give details. She didn't ask. She looked down at her hands. But she's not stupid. Emma knows something changed. She sees we're not sleeping in the same room. She sees I'm not wearing my ring. She asked me if we were getting divorced. Michael felt that question like a hand on his chest. He'd asked himself that question hundreds of times, but never dared to ask her. What did you tell her? Dr. Holloway asked. Sarah looked at him. Her eyes were bright, but not with tears, bright with resolve. I told her we're trying, she said. I told her her parents love her, and we're learning how to love each other again. I don't know if that's true, but I didn't want to lie to her. She turned to look at Michael, the first time today. And in that look, Michael saw something that made him feel both pain and relief. She wasn't looking at him with anger, not with tenderness either. She was looking at him with the truth, naked, uncovered. I don't know if I can love you the way I used to, she said, her voice low. I don't know if I can look at you without seeing what I saw, but I know I want to try, for Emma, for 15 years, because you're not just the man on that screen. Michael sat still. He wanted to say he loved her. Wanted to say he'd do anything to deserve her. One wanted to say he understood if she couldn't forgive him, but he didn't say anything. He just sat there, taking in each of her words like precious stones, painful but valuable, because they were real. Dr. Holloway looked at both of them, letting the silence settle. Then he turned to Sarah. Sarah, do you want to continue? That question fell into the room like a stone into still water. Michael looked at Sarah, and in that moment, he felt every heartbeat. He looked at her hands on her lap, at her pale blue sweater, at her long hair loose over her shoulders. Sarah didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, where sunlight was coming through maple trees that had turned red and gold. A leaf fell outside the window, spinning in the wind slowly like it didn't want to touch the ground. Michael counted. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. He looked at the ring no longer on her finger. 4 seconds, 5 seconds. He remembered the day he put it on her, in the small church, his hand shaking with nerves. 6 seconds, 7 seconds. He remembered the first time she said, "I love you," after Emma was born, her voice tired but happy. 8 seconds, 9 seconds. He remembered the night he held the car keys, standing at the door, while Emma slept upstairs, knowing nothing. 10 seconds, 11 seconds, 12 seconds. Michael didn't breathe. He looked at Sarah, and in that time he saw her. Not the wife he'd married, not the woman in the family photo on the wall. He saw someone standing at the edge, looking into the abyss, deciding not to jump. 13 seconds, 14 seconds, 15 seconds. Sarah turned back. She looked at Dr. Holloway, then at Michael. Her eyes weren't red and swollen like 3 months ago. They were dry, calm, but there was something in them Michael had never seen before. 16 seconds, 17 seconds, 18 seconds. "I want to try," Sarah said. Her voice was a whisper, but in the quiet room it rang clear. "I want to try, but I'm not promising anything." 19 seconds, 20 seconds. Dr. Holloway nodded. He didn't say anything, didn't clap, didn't praise. He just nodded like someone who'd seen this many times before and knew this was just one small step on a long road. Michael sat still. He felt each word "I want to try" like drops of water in a desert. He knew it wasn't a promise. He knew she could still leave any time. He knew the ring was still in the drawer and might stay there forever. But she'd said, "I want to try," and that was all he could ask for. The session ended. They stood up, thanked Dr. Holloway, and left the room. The hallway was empty, sunlight from the window at the end making a long stripe on the floor. Michael walked next to Sarah, not too close, not too far, just close enough that if she wanted, she could reach him, or not. They got to the parking lot. Michael opened the car door. Sarah got in the passenger seat. He got in the driver's seat, buckled up, and looked out the window. The maple tree in front of the building had changed color, red and gold leaves scattered on the asphalt. He didn't start the engine. He sat still, feeling Sarah's presence beside him. Not the warmth of a wife, not the closeness of a partner, but a different presence. The steadiness of someone who'd decided to try. He reached his hand over, not grabbing, not demanding. He just put his hand in the space between the seats, palm up, open. An invitation, not a request. He looked at his hand, the fingers that had shaken when transferring money, that had clenched tight watching the video, that had written the letter under Emma's pillow, the hand that had done things he couldn't forget. And now it lay there, open, not clenched, not grabbing. Michael didn't look at Sarah. He didn't want her to feel pressured. He just put his hand there and waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. He felt the warmth of her hand before it touched him. Her fingers, long, thin, cold, rested on his palm, light as a falling leaf. She didn't pull away. Michael slowly closed his fingers, covering her hand. Not squeezing, just enough for her to know he was here, that he wasn't going anywhere, that he would wait. They sat like that in the car, in the late autumn sun, hands intertwined. Neither spoke. Michael heard Sarah's breathing beside him, steady, slow. He felt each of her fingers, each line on her palm, each small pulse from her wrist. He thought about 3 months ago, the night he held the car keys, standing at the door, not knowing where to go. He thought about the letter under Emma's pillow, the words smudged with tears. He thought about the 3 men who didn't have anyone holding their hand, and he thought about the hand holding his now. Michael didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know if Sarah would ever put her ring back on. He didn't know if they'd ever sleep in the same room again, laugh together again, look at each other without seeing what had happened. He didn't know if forgiveness existed for what he'd done. But he knew one thing, right now, in this moment, she was holding his hand, and she wasn't pulling away. Michael looked out the window at the red and gold leaves scattered on the pavement, at the sunlight starting to slant toward the end of the day. He felt Sarah's hand in his, no longer cold, warming up. He didn't know if this was the start of something new or just a pause on a long road. He didn't know if they could rebuild what had been broken, but he knew he would try, every day, one step at a time. And now the first step was sitting here in this car in the late autumn sun, his hand open, letting her choose to hold it. Sarah turned to look at him. Michael didn't turn back, but he felt her eyes on his face. He felt the weighing in them, the caution and a small light, very small, of something that might be hope. "Let's go home," Sarah said, her voice a whisper. Michael started the engine. The car pulled out of the lot onto the familiar road, past trees changing color, past houses with lawns turning gold. His hand was still holding Sarah's, and she still didn't pull away. They got home as the sun was setting, the last rays painting the sky pink and orange. Emma was sitting on the front steps wearing headphones, holding her phone. She saw the car pull into the driveway, stood up, and ran over. Michael opened the door and got out. Emma ran to him, and in that moment, she didn't ask anything, didn't say anything. She just ran to hug him, like she used to when she was little, like nothing had changed. Michael held his daughter, feeling her messy hair on his shoulder, the familiar smell of shampoo, the warmth of a small body that wasn't so small anymore. He looked over her shoulder and saw Sarah standing on the other side of the car, watching them, holding the keys. Sarah didn't walk over. She just stood there, in the fading light, watching them. And on her face, Michael saw something he hadn't seen in 3 months. Not a smile, but a softening, like the sky after rain when the clouds start to part and the first rays of sunlight slip through the gaps. Emma let go of him and ran to hug her mom. Sarah held their daughter, her eyes still looking at Michael over Emma's shoulder. And in that moment, no one said anything. They just stood there, the three of them, in the fading light, in Emma's hug. And in that silence, Michael felt something. They were still here, all three of them, after everything. He didn't know what that meant for tomorrow, for next week, for the months ahead. He didn't know if they could fix what was broken. He didn't know if Sarah would ever look at him without seeing what had happened. If Emma would ever know the whole truth, if he would ever forgive himself. But he knew one thing. Right now, in this moment, they were standing together, under the darkening sky, and Sarah's hand was holding Emma's, and her eyes were still on him, and in that look, Michael saw a promise. Not a promise of forgiveness, not a promise of a future, but a promise of the present. I'm here, today I'm here. And that was enough, at least for today. Michael walked toward them. He didn't take Sarah's hand. He didn't hug her. He just stood beside them. The three of them on the front steps, watching the last light of the day fade behind the maple trees. Emma said something about homework, about a movie she wanted to watch, about how she'd make breakfast tomorrow. Her voice was happy, normal, like nothing had changed. And maybe for her, that was true. Emma didn't need to know everything. Emma just needed to know her parents were still here, that this house was still home, that the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling still shone every night. Sarah opened the door and went inside. Emma ran in first, her footsteps echoing up the stairs. Michael stood at the door watching Sarah take off her shoes, and he saw the ring still not on her finger. He looked at that empty space and felt it like an unanswered question. Sarah looked up and saw him watching. She didn't say anything, just looked at him, and in that look, Michael saw something. She knew what he was looking at, and she didn't hide. She reached out her hand, not to hold, just to touch his arm, a light touch. Quick, but enough for him to know she was still here. Come inside, she said. Michael stepped in. The door closed behind him, separating the cold evening from the warmth of the house. He heard Emma running upstairs, Sarah walking into the kitchen, water running, plates being taken from the cabinet. The ordinary sounds of a family in the evening. He stood in the hallway, looking up the stairs at the family photos on the wall. Emma as a newborn. Emma at 3 holding a birthday cake. Emma's first day of school. Emma and Sarah at the beach. Emma and Michael in the park. Photos of a life that had passed, and maybe of a life still going. He went into the kitchen. Sarah was getting food from the fridge. Emma had come down and was getting plates, spoons, forks. They were working together like nothing had happened. Michael stood in the kitchen doorway, watching them. Sarah turned, saw him, and handed him a plate. Set the table, she said, her voice calm. Michael took the plate. He went to the table, put it down, and started setting out bowls and chopsticks. Emma ran out, put a pot of soup on the table. Sarah brought out a plate of grilled meat, salad, and a bowl of rice. They sat down. Michael at the head of the table, Sarah on the right, Emma on the left. Their usual spots, the spots from 1,000 dinners before. Emma poured water for everyone, and when she sat down, she looked at her parents, then picked up her chopsticks. I'm going to eat first, she said, and started eating like any other day. Michael looked at Sarah. She was holding her chopsticks, but hadn't eaten yet. She was looking at the food in front of her, and on her face, Michael saw something he couldn't read. Not sadness, not anger. Just the thoughtfulness of someone thinking about something far away. Then she looked up and met his eyes. And in that look, Michael saw something that let him breathe. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. She looked at him, and in her eyes there was a small light. Not the light of hope, not the light of forgiveness, but the light of someone who'd decided to stay, at least for this dinner. Sarah picked up her chopsticks, took a piece of meat, Put it in Michael's bowl, then Emma's, then her own. Didn't say anything, didn't explain. Michael looked at the meat in his bowl. He couldn't remember the last time Sarah put food in his bowl. Maybe before everything. Maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, in a life he thought would last forever. He looked at Sarah and she looked back. Neither said anything, but in that silence, Michael felt something. This wasn't forgiveness. This was just one small step, one small gesture, one piece of meat in a bowl. But it was real. Michael picked up his chopsticks, ate that piece of meat, and felt its taste on his tongue. Salty, sweet, warm. The taste of a family dinner. The taste of a life still breathing. Emma said something about school, about a test she had coming up, about a new friend. Her voice was happy like any other day. Sarah answered, asked questions like any other day. Michael also talked, also asked, also smiled. Not the fake smile of company parties, but the smile of someone trying, learning to smile again. Dinner ended. Emma washed the dishes like any other day. Sarah made tea like any other day. Michael sat at the table, watching them like any other day. But it wasn't like any other day, because today, there was something different, something small, something no one said out loud. When Emma went upstairs, when Sarah poured tea into 2 cups, put one in front of Michael, and sat in the chair across from him. When they looked at each other through the steam rising from their cups, and when Sarah put her hand on the table, not to hold his, just to put it there, between the 2 cups, palm up, Michael looked at her hand. He looked at her fingers without a ring, at the lines on her palm etched into his memory, at her open hand. He didn't reach out right away. He looked at it and thought about what had passed and what might come. He thought about 3 months ago, when he held the car keys and didn't know where to go. He thought about now, when he knew he wanted to stay. He put his hand on the table next to hers, not touching. Then he waited. Sarah looked at his hand. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the small space between their hands. Just a few centimeters, but it could have been a canyon. And then slowly she turned her hand over, palm down. She didn't hold his hand, but she put her hand on top of his, her fingers lightly touching the back of his hand like a leaf falling on still water. Michael didn't move. He felt the warmth of her hand, each finger, each line on her palm. He didn't squeeze, he just let it be there. Let her decide when to pull away or not. Sarah didn't pull her hand away. They sat like that in the kitchen, under the yellow light, 2 cups of tea gone cold, 2 hands resting together. Neither spoke, and in that silence, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not hope. Hope was still too far away. Just presence. Hers. Theirs. Of a life still breathing, still trying, still learning to trust again. And that was enough, at least for tonight. Michael looked out the window, where the sky had gone completely dark, stars starting to appear one by one. He thought about Emma sleeping upstairs with her glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. He thought about Sarah sitting next to him, her hand on his. He thought about the 3 men who didn't get this chance. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know if they could fix what was broken. He didn't know if someday Sarah would put her ring back on, if they'd sleep in the same room again, if they'd laugh together without the shadow of what had happened. But he knew one thing, right now, in this moment, her hand was on his, and she wasn't pulling away. And that was a start.